Honestly, I don't think I've ever experienced paranormal activity in terms of seeing something. But ever since I was a kid in my childhood home, I was really scared, almost traumatized of seeing something or hearing something in the dark at night. No specific reason for it. I would just stare at the door frame of my room, which was always opened at night, and wait for something to show. I never even liked horror movies, and even now at 21 I avoid them because I know they freak me out, so I don't believe that the fear came from the movies. The thing is, I moved to a different city when I was 18 years old and changed a few apartments until now, and in every single one of them, I felt chills. Everything is fine, and then comes a certain time of night when it's like the energy in the room changes, and I have a feeling that someone is watching me. I always believed that if I could convince myself not to believe in spirits or that the paranormal is real, then I can escape from that, and nothing weird will happen to me if I don't believe or give it attention. Am I right? But here we are. I started to think, what if the cold, watching feeling and fear I get every night is related to some childhood trauma that I might not remember? Fast forward to today. My boyfriend and I moved back to his parents' house after the lockdown. We have a separate upper apartment for ourselves, and no one but him ever lived there. We have spent so many months and nights here before, and really the apartment never gave me any chills. Until the last month or so. So lately I have this really bad vibe in this place, especially at night. It can be dark outside around 6 p.m. or 10 p.m. and everything is super. Then there just comes this time, after midnight, when the air in the room changes and I feel like something negative has entered. The whole energy is negative, and the feeling of someone looking at me returns. Most of the time I'm scared to have my eyes opened, that I might see something. He doesn't feel the same thing and says it's because of the stress and anxiety. And true, it might just be paranoia, and I'm going crazy. But I had several nights when I really did feel like something was messing with me. I would wake up with the sensation like someone had pushed me, and my boyfriend was dead asleep. I would have sleep paralysis and again would have a feeling like someone is poking me and hear banging noises that weren't there. I was sleepless for a few nights, and then I started taking Xanax just to make me fall into deep sleep to get some rest. When I am able to sleep, there's that time before falling into sleep when I feel the most vulnerable because of the dark and the dead silence. There are radiator noises and downstairs noises, which, by the way, are loud footsteps even in the middle of the night. And sometimes I would ask them if they were awake at the time, and they said they were sleeping. But still, I kind of comfort myself with the idea of it just being normal house noises. The worst thing is going to the bathroom at night. I have bladder issues, so it's normal for me to go at 1, 2 a.m. Don't know why, but I noticed this pattern. And often, I'm just terrified. I use my phone as a flashlight and practically run there. If I can hold it, I do, because that's how scared I am of the negative energy in the air. I'm so afraid of seeing a shadow or a face staring at me. It's like I know that something is present, but I'm unable to give it shape or form. Sometimes it's like I can sense someone's breath on my face. Never thought I would write something like this because it is the opposite of ignoring the problem and convincing myself that I am imagining. But I'm not sure what to do anymore. Every night I lay in my bed, and in just moments the air in the room switches to negative, cold, and spooky. I can't live like this. It's stressing me out so much, and I just want to know if it makes any sense. Am I crazy and too paranoid so that I just imagine all of this? Or could it really be that something is there? I bought a replica of Ivan the Terrible and his son. An old piece of macabre art from Russia back in the day, and hung it up on my wall in a huge portrait behind me yesterday. It's a rumor or popular belief that the painting is cursed, and I've always been a fan of strange items and collectibles, so that's why I bought it. As I went to sleep last night, I was stricken with nightmares. Terrible nightmares. I dreamt I was in a camper with a friend and we sat down to watch a movie called Pendulum. It was a knockoff of Hellraiser. We began watching it and the computer screen just shut off, and we couldn't get it to turn back on, so we had a collective fuck it moment, and I exited the camper to go back inside to the house, whilst my dream friend stayed in the camper. As I came back out, still during the dream night, with a drink, I noticed blood splattered on the windows and rushed inside. My friend had been beaten to death, and Pendulum was pulling himself through the computer screen. After this, I woke up, and by that, I mean I came to a real-world setting where I was asleep on my couch last night. I attempted to get up and get some water, as I was thirsting after such a nightmare. I made it to the kitchen, cracked it open, and let it hit my lips, and then suddenly, I was on the couch again. In my mind at that moment, I considered that I had actually woken up. I sat up and walked into the kitchen again, cracked open that same water, when suddenly the refrigerator opened beside me, and I knew I was dreaming then. I woke up on the couch again, real as day, except it wasn't, as I went to drink that water again, and woke up on the couch again. After this is where it really started to get frightening. I considered that I was stuck in a loop, except this time I went to get up for water and walked past that area with the painting, and noticed that it was gone. This let me know I was still dreaming, and that I had another false awakening. I woke up for the water once more and started across the living room when I looked to an open doorway that I hang colorful beads from, and in the dark room veiled by the hanging threads was Pendulum. That woke me again. This time I ran to the window and looked out to see cops rushing down my small street to the neighbor's house. My neighbor shot and killed her husband in the front yard 2 weeks ago, and that woke me up again. After waking up a few more times for water, I tried to go outside after another loop, except when I opened the front door, it was pitch black. Then car lights turned on and sped toward me. As I was about to get smacked with someone's F-150, I woke up again. At this point, I stopped trying to go anywhere and just kept trying over and over and over to slap myself truly awake. After looping for another 30 times or so, I eventually actually woke up and was relieved. I got that fucking water and downed it in one go. I worked at a small, old hospital for a couple of years. 4 floors, only 2 floors being used, and a small ER. I was a med-surg RN working 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Med-surg meant that we had patients who just had surgery, and also patients who were just sick. Most of the patients were elderly and just sick with things like pneumonia, anemia, acute kidney failure, etc. When older folks get sick, they tend to get confused, and might do or say things that they normally wouldn't. But this, whatever the hell it was not cool. This was mortifying, and I'm the only one who heard it. We joked that because the hospital was so old that it was creepy, specifically on the right wing of our unit, and obviously at night. Guess who got assigned the right wing that night? I got bedtime meds ready for the old folks down there, and started walking down the hall with my med cart and charts for each patient. I'd received report from the previous day's RN that room 214 was a woman, call her Kathy, who was only 55 and in for pneumonia, completely alert and oriented. I give the patients down there their meds one by one, and yeah, I'm tired and mildly annoyed that it takes room 216 over 10 minutes to swallow a plethora of pills one by one, and then proceeded to pull out his IV that was delivering his antibiotics. I digress. So needless to say, it took me a little bit longer to get to room 214. She didn't seem upset, just tired. I did my assessment, and she was, in fact, oriented to day, time, name, and location. I said goodnight after hanging another bag of fluids. I'm hanging out in the hall with my computer documenting my assessments, and I hear something that shook me. It sounded like whispering, but I heard more than one person doing it. I cocked my head up to hear better. I mean, it's night shift and I'm tired, so I'm making sure that I actually did hear this. I followed the noise to the outside of Kathy's room, and there seems to be a full-blown whispery conversation going on with multiple people. I couldn't make out what the different voices were saying, but it sounded like chanting of some sort. I had to make sure that I was legitimately hearing these whispers that seemed like they were coming from different people and try to make sense of it. I walked slowly past her door, which was slightly cracked open. Hoping to hear things more clearly, the whisper chanting sounds only got louder, but were still unintelligible. Kathy, who had been tucked in bed and dozing off when I saw her less than 7 minutes ago, was now sitting straight up on the side of her bed, looking away from me at the wall. Doesn't sound that scary, right? Well, Kathy was unable to lift herself out of bed without assistance during my assessment. She was having labored breathing when I assessed her. Now Kathy has pulled her nasal cannula out of her nose, that plastic thing that goes around your face that has the 2 spouts that go up your nose to give you extra oxygen, and sat up in bed in less than 7 minutes without struggle, and then she stood up, still looking away. She turned and walked to the bathroom, still without seeing me. Because she was labeled a fall risk, she shouldn't be out of bed alone. I saw her profile, and her lips were not moving. But the whispers grew louder. I panicked, but kept my cool. I briskly walked to the nurse's station and asked if a nursing assistant could please help Kathy with the restroom. I normally would do it myself, but I was rather busy and Kathy was doing quite well on her own. I was sweating, freaking out, and getting further behind on my charting. The nursing aide helped Kathy and didn't report anything unusual when I asked her how she was doing. I swear I heard those voices. They were unsettling, to say the least. I requested the left wing as often as possible after that, and eventually went on to work at a larger hospital. When I was a child, my family often spent the weekends or the holidays at my grandmother's house. As a typical traditional Malay house, the house was made out of wood and was quite huge. Not a surprise, since my father does have a lot of siblings, 9 of them. It wasn't just my immediate family. Most weekends or holidays, even my uncles and aunt would be there too, along with their family. Sometimes there would be around 50 to 70 of us inside that house. It was truly one of my fondest memories, where the entire huge family would sit together to have dinner or celebrate birthdays or whatever. One day, my grandmother fell sick. The doctor simply told us that her health was deteriorating since she was quite old at the time, but that she required no hospitalization. My dad and his siblings all made up their mind that my grandmother should stay with them. Every month, she would stay with a different one of her children at their house. I remember she stayed the most at my house, since it was the biggest at that time. I was happy, since she was a great storyteller and a great cook. In the meantime, my father and uncles hired a nearby neighbor to take care of and clean my grandmother's house every once in a while. Unfortunately, her health continued to decline. She told my father that she wanted to stay in her old home. At first, we didn't like the idea with her being alone in that house, especially with her declining health. After much discussion, my eldest uncle decided to build a house directly in front of my grandmother's house for him to stay in. In the meantime, they would rent a nearby house so that he or my cousins could visit her every day. My father and his siblings also agreed to hire a nanny for my grandmother so that she would never be alone. Fortunately, despite no one having been staying in the house for about 2 years, it was relatively clean. It had been almost a week since my grandmother returned to her own home. The weekend was coming, and my father decided to bring back the tradition of staying at my grandmother's. That Friday night, around 2 of us were there, and that night strange things began to happen. The first to notice that something was off were my cousins. They were all the daughters of Dad's youngest sibling. They were always cheerful, but at that time I remember their faces almost always looking terrified. I chalked it up to them just being kids, which was ironic since I was only around 10 myself at that time. Then, as I walked past their bedroom, I heard through the thin wall that the girls complained to their parents that they had noticed a few shadowy figures, which had been all over the house. My uncle tried to convince them that it was just their imagination. I decided not to care much. I was too tired and sleepy. That night, while I was sleeping, I remember waking up and staring above and seeing something terrifying. Just so you know, a traditional Malay house rarely has a ceiling. The house beam was exposed, and you can see the inside layer of the roof. During my sudden awakening, I saw something like a shadow sitting on the house beam. I had to rub my eyes to see, and after a while I began to make out what it was. It was some sort of creature or something. Am I still dreaming? I thought to myself. I was utterly terrified. I could see the creature, but it was like my brain failed to see exactly how it looked. Sometimes it would look like a lion, then a crocodile, then a huge bird or some other kind of animal. And then it looked at me. All I could remember was its huge red eyes and a wide grin filled with fangs. I tried to scream, but my voice stuck at my throat, and my body felt stiff, as if I were paralyzed. All I could do was slowly pull up the blanket and hide my body underneath it, and force myself to go back to sleep, hoping that it was a nightmare. The next day, as I sat alone at the stairs, trying to get rid of the memories of what happened, from the corner of my eyes I could sense that someone or something had been peeking out from the toilet area looking at the living room. It appeared to be a child, or was the size of a child, with pale, gray skin. Another time I was sitting in a chair in the living room. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but it happened throughout the day and the night. That same child. Then I heard my aunts talking with each other. It turns out that I wasn't the only one who had noticed it. The entire family had seen it too. Or rather, we could only see it through the corner of our eyes. When we all turned to look at it directly, it disappeared. Some decided to check it out themselves, and yet nothing would ever be there. My uncle quietly told us that when a house was abandoned, there will always be something that will live there. That house had been abandoned for 2 years before, so obviously something had moved in, and we were all simply intruders. He told us that if we didn't bother them, they wouldn't bother us. That night we all prayed together, as well as recited some holy prayers. Yet I could still see the little stalker, and I could begin to notice a few shadows around the house that did not belong to the furniture or to the other people living there. Worse for me was at night. I woke up again, and this time the thing was already grinning at me with what I assumed a hand or finger poking at my cheek. It didn't feel solid at all. It felt more like a cloud of smoke. Again, I tried to scream, but my body felt stiff. Like before, I could only slowly pull my blanket to cover my head and force myself back to sleep. I never dare to sleep at that house ever again. Anytime we ever went back to my grandmother's house, during either weekends or holidays, I simply stayed at my uncle's house that was right in front of it. Yet every time I entered there, I could still sense the small figure poking its head out from the bathroom wall and the shadows that would be moving around. My grandmother passed away around 8 years ago, and since then we never have had reason to stay at that house. Now, the house was downsized while I was at university, yet it still has the original layout of the lower area. They only actually got rid of the upper area. I asked my father why not simply demolish the entire building. He then told me that even getting rid of the upper area was difficult. Workers were pushed by nothing, and electronics and engines would always malfunction. In the end, they decided not to touch the bottom area and just continue to use it as storage. I'm an atheist, not very superstitious, but my family are big believers and have always claimed that our house was haunted. So about 2 hours ago, I fell asleep in the guest bedroom. Everyone avoids that room, but I like the ambience, so I've been spending a lot of time in there lately. I should probably note that there's a mirror by the bed. So first, I thought my mom walked in, and I remember saying, "Get out!" I know I heard the door open. I just asked her if she went in, and she didn't even know that I was taking a nap. Then, as I was sleeping, I heard whispering and scratching sounds. I started remembering things that never happened, and I could envision a lady with black hair sitting on the couch in the room. I knew I needed to get the hell out of there, so I tried waking up. The dream was so vivid that I thought I did wake up. I looked around the room, and written in red everywhere was murder, death, etc. There were also red tally marks all over the walls. There was a doll on the floor, a life-sized cloth one, and that's when I knew I was still dreaming. Suddenly I look over to the couch, and there she is. It was the lady with black hair. I tried waking up, but at this point I was experiencing sleep paralysis and I couldn't open my eyes. Finally, I woke up for real and ran out of that room. I don't ever want to go back. Anyone have any ideas on what happened? Am I overreacting? Edit. Okay, I'm getting freaked out now. I just woke up. It's 5 a.m. to another dream. This time I was in a normal world and felt like I was being watched. I kept telling everyone, but they wouldn't believe me until I fell asleep in the dream. Something or someone pulled the blankets up and laid down next to me. I'm not joking. Someone please help. I don't know what's going on. I had a gut feeling that it was that thing again. I woke up and had to call my mom to come in. This is getting weird. For someone who doesn't believe in God, I want to call an exorcist. I've worked 3.5 years now as a psych tech at a unit that covers the southeast portion of my state. The unit I work on you can think of as the ER for psych. We admit individuals who are having mental breaks or who need help for self-harm, being disabled from their psych disorder, or harming others. The unit is freaking old, and has been around since the time of Moses, it seems. Even though weird events go on, it's a pretty awesome job helping others, and I love working here while I finish going to school. I will say to start out with, that most nights on the unit are really quite boring. Naturally, with the type of individuals that can stay here, the unit can have a change in its feeling rather quickly, though. I've had individuals who I've never met before know strange things about me or other patients, such as where I've buried my dogs, names of family members, or the streets that I've grown up on. You'll get a weird vibe walking by certain patients. At times, my patients will say creepy stuff, such as being told the devil has sent its demons to watch me and not mess up. I witnessed a lady who came in for suicidal thoughts slowly progress to sitting in a corner and screaming "no, stop" till she couldn't talk. This lady shouted and shrieked the same phrases over and over in an empty room. The unit also has one room that I dislike because no matter who gets assigned to stay in that room, they always seem to get much worse before they get better. The room is always cold, even when the heat comes through the vent. I can recall 4 patients asking to switch rooms because the shadows in the room surround them when they sleep and buzz at them at night. My most recent experience was while doing my safety check in an unoccupied room which had the door open. Previously in the shift, I knew it was locked because I had checked all the unused rooms to make sure that they were indeed closed and locked. I thought housekeeping had come up to clean the room possibly, since a patient was discharged from in there the night before. Next thing I knew, I had a soap bar and a shampoo bottle thrown at me. It wasn't a joke throw either, but a rip right at me. The door slammed shut. I think a patient is in there now. I open the door to a completely empty, clean room. I lock it up, pick up the soaps, and try to tell the other tech that I'm working with what had happened. We pull up the camera and sure enough you can watch that event unfold in the hall. Not all experiences are bad or evil on the unit. The patients will sometimes tell me that they had family that's passed on stay the night in their room and visit with them until they fall asleep. Another time I had one patient tell me that a giant white figure stood guard by their door and kept the shadow figures from coming in until they were finally able to doze off. We do have regular figures that walk the yard and hang out in the rooms. One we call the engineer because the figure is always being seen in the utility closet. The mysterious stranger resembles a character out of a game. He's a tall guy in a tannish trench coat and business hat walking the same path around 3 a.m. and disappears after he passes by a big elm tree. Before you come onto the unit, there's a fairly large gym to play basketball, lift weights, or exercise, which low-risk patients can use with a staff member. Before you come onto the unit, there's a fairly large gym to play basketball, lift weights, or exercise, which low-risk patients can use with a staff member. On my 4th meal break, I usually eat and do a little working out. The gym also has a radio to hook up your phone to and to jam some music. This particular time, I'm shooting hoops and listening to Metallica. My break ends, so I put the ball away and unplug my phone to leave. As the music cuts, I hear a soft voice say, "Keep playing." Similar story from a coworker from the same place. When she turned the music off, she heard someone picking up singing where the song had stopped. Apparently, they also enjoy music just as much as the rest of us. Last night was awfully weird. I was in my childhood home, but at my current age. As I opened the door to my grandmother's room, it suddenly swung back and forth while my hands were still holding it from the side, not the doorknob, and it pulled me forcefully into the room and onto the floor. I felt a cold sweat coming on, but suddenly realized that I had to toughen up and shake it off. I screamed something like, "This is my house! You have no right to scare me! How dare you!" over and over again. I came close to the door and would hear a faint, high-pitched, distorted, tee-hee kind of laugh. Then I woke up. I thought it was already around 6 a.m. because that's usually the time when my alarm goes off. As I grabbed my phone, I was surprised to see that the time was actually 3:07 a.m. I already felt partially awake, as anyone who wakes up at 6 a.m. would. Now I have to force myself back to sleep or I'll feel awful in the morning. I play some ambient sleep sounds from Alexa while I observe the room, anxiously expecting something out of the ordinary, but nothing happened. I fell back asleep, and in my next dream, I was at a hospital with a group of people that I don't know, but somewhere we were grouped together. There's about 5 or 6 of us in a room, with a dead person in the bed, covered with a sheet. As I left the room, I saw 2 more of the people in our group suddenly appear in a different room, somewhat helping each other put another dead body into a hospital bed while the family weeps. I went back to see the rest of the group in the original room, trying to position the dead body to sit up. The dead guy is of mixed Chinese descent, a bit overweight, and bald. Then some information came into my head that he used to own a restaurant or a bar. As they moved his torso upwards, they failed, and the dead body dropped onto the floor. This is when things start to get really weird, because the dead guy woke up like he was startled from his sleep. He stood up and started chasing us, accusing us of killing him. His bowels were a mess, and I could see a stab wound on his belly and on his lower back. I ran away in a long corridor and found myself in the nurse's changing room. It had open cubicles like the ones from football players' dressing rooms, with scrubs and casual clothes alike hanging on the wall. I was partially covered in the dead guy's bodily fluids, so I washed up. Then a nurse found me. I looked terrified of what happened, so I explained the situation to her and led her to that room. The nurse came in and started to comfort the dead guy. He began to calm down and sat beside the nurse, then closed his eyes. The nurse looked at me, and without talking, some information came into my mind. I learned that he was a hopeless case, so they just let him lie down until he dies, as he was already in the process of dying when we startled him. After that moment, I woke up, and this time it was truly 6 a.m., 6:30-ish already. I didn't feel any dread as you would in a nightmare. I did a bit of research on dream meanings, but I felt that it didn't fit with me. Then I found out the significance of 3:07 a.m. from the movie The Conjuring, so I thought the exact time was just a coincidence, since it's just a movie. I could not remember the last time I woke up in the middle of the night. It would be very, very rare that it's not worth remembering. But waking up at 3 a.m. with 2 weird dreams will definitely stay with me forever. The story I'm about to tell you takes place including myself, my mother, and my younger sister. We were in St. Francisville, Louisiana, staying at the infamous Myrtles plantation. I'm aware that when it comes to touristy haunted places, the paranormal events that may occur there are questionable regarding the issue of their validity. As such, I tend to err on the side of caution with my own beliefs, and I always do a thorough check of wherever I'm staying. I keep a lookout for artificial motors, wires, basically anything that can cause things to happen that may seem paranormal. The cabin that we stayed in was clear. We arrived at the plantation around 2 p.m. that first day. We were given a complimentary tour of the grounds. I was getting vibes all over the place. It was pretty insane from the moment that I stepped foot on that soil, to be honest. I state the bit about getting vibes with emphasis on the fact that I do get vibes, sometimes, rarely, and never that strong. After the tour was finished, we were shown to our rooms, we were let in, and left to our own devices. I did my evaluation on the room, then afterward noticed that any time I neared the back door, I picked up on energy even more strongly than I had been during the tour of the rest of the grounds. I just felt that something had happened there, and I knew that I had to find out what. It was about 5 p.m. by that point, and understandably, we were getting pretty hungry. We left the plantation to go into town and get some dinner. We got back around 6:30, and were walking back over to our cabin when a friendly woman that we'd seen earlier walked over to us. She asked if we wanted to see her room. It was located in the actual plantation house, whereas we were staying in what would have originally been one of the slave cabins. We said yes, of course, so she took us up there. We looked around, and at first there was nothing noticeable as far as feelings or energy goes. Then I went into the bathroom. It was the most awful, oppressive atmosphere in there. It was creepy and terrible, and I hated it instantly. I just wanted to leave. I didn't necessarily think that something had happened there, rather that something inhabited that space. And I knew that it was not something kind. We didn't stay very long. Maybe 15, 20 minutes later, we went back to our cabin and settled in for the night. Lots of vibes in that cabin, and my sister and I, we were somewhat younger at the time, shared a bed because we were scared. We stayed up late playing a game. When midnight rolled around, we decided that it was probably best to put it away and go to bed. As soon as we had put the game up and silence set in, however, I noticed a sound. The rocking chair on the front porch was creaking as it moved. Backward, forward, backward, forward. Hard enough that I could be certain that the wind was not responsible. I freaked out a little bit, but decided that I wasn't going to mention it to my sister. It would probably just scare her. We laid down for the night. She got to sleep quick. I, on the other hand, was having sleep issues. Nothing but thoughts and worries running through my mind. The moment I heard footsteps on the stones outside of our cabin, though, all of those pesky voices became irrelevant. Keep in mind, our cabin was fenced in, so it couldn't have been anyone who didn't have the key. Regardless, I heard the footsteps, and they continued as I heard the light slapping sounds of feet on the wooden porch along with the groan of someone's weight. They continued forward, right through the door, and I heard as whoever it was passed right by my bed. The whole time, I saw nothing. The footstep sounds made their way across the room to the wall, then out the back door. I will say that while I saw nothing, I did smell something. It was as though someone were wearing rosehip perfume, trailing the scent along behind them everywhere they walked. This event took place at about 1 a.m. Already having trouble getting to sleep, I didn't rest until 2.5 hours later, approximately 3:30 a.m. When we got up the next day, we went into the main house for breakfast, where we heard stories from other campers about their experiences. Theirs were equally intriguing, including people who felt a presence sit down on their bed in the middle of the night, and a person coming out of a cabin to tell people to be quiet. Yet the cabin in question was totally devoid of anyone alive. We ate, shared our stories, and returned to our cabin. We sat there for a while playing games on our tablets, just relaxing really, as it was a nice room despite its history and the fact that it was haunted. I can't remember why, but my sister and mom got into an argument. The disagreement obviously didn't sit well with whatever spirits were occupying the cabin, because they were both interrupted by the faucet in the bathroom being turned on full force, and then back off again. It startled all three of us. We cleared out of the cabin in less than 30 seconds after that. That is the end to my Myrtle's Plantation story. I am never going to forget how terrifying that it was to be awake by myself in a cabin in the middle of nowhere and suddenly realize that you are not alone. My first visit to this hospital was in 2018. After searching for the address for a while, I came across one that looked accurate enough and went on my way to that lost place with a friend of mine. We arrived, astonished by the size of the complex. I didn't do a lot of research before that. I just knew that it used to be a hospital and was built during World War II, and by the address, it seemed legit. On our way down from the parking lot to the lost place, our excitement was growing, but so was our anxiety for reasons that we just couldn't ascertain. We make our way onto the complex at the part where the main entrance was before, and the air felt really dense. My friend felt the same way, but we brushed it off as just being a bit nervous, just ourselves, and we started to walk past some buildings at the entrance, completely focused and being amazed. At some point, my pulse must have slowed down due to me being focused on trying to take in everything I was seeing, because I noticed that it increased in speed when we reached the buildings where I suspected that the patients would have been. It felt like there was strong electricity in the air that made me feel even more uneasy. That's when we heard a door slam behind us at one of the buildings. We, of course, completely froze. The sound came from a building that was pretty far away from us, and that sound was very loud. There was no wind at all that could have caused the heavy doors to slam like that. The trees weren't moving, nor did we hear anything else. Just one door that decided to slam shut on its own. We nervously chuckled and decided to move closer to the exit. I asked my friend if I should record this visit on my phone, and she agreed. We both turned on airplane mode and went on our way. Whether it was due to our anxiety, or us being too alert, or something actually being there, we would turn around or stop walking at the same time, asking the other if we had heard that sound. Sometimes the sounds behind us resembled soft footsteps. Other times we would hear silent whispers that we couldn't quite make out. At some point I began to question my sanity, but I knew that there had to be something there to make such specific noises, loud enough that my friend would also hear them, as I did. As we were walking toward the actual exit, we stopped to look at one building and we heard a very, very loud bang behind us, making our walking become very determined as we made our way to the main street. The bang was accompanied by other sounds that we couldn't define back then. Fast forward and both of us are at my place. We grab individual headphones and start to listen to the recording. And boy, was that some weird stuff. We both enabled plane mode before I hit the record button, but there were so many disturbances in the recording, distinct sounds like someone coughing, whispers, with clear vowels, that we couldn't quite make out the full words to. A woman's voice going, shh, breathing, and bleeps. I have to admit that we were freaking out a lot. I was almost crying because I found it to be so chilling. The thing that baffled us the most was the loud bang that made us leave. I swear to you, it wasn't there. At all. Not the bang on the recording that startled us so much that made us leave the place, but silent sounds? You can hear us being startled and agreeing to leave immediately, but no bang could be heard on that recording, and it's still not there. I held my phone the exact same way that I had been since I started that recording. I didn't put my clothes against one mic. The mics weren't broken after a test recording that we did. So there should be a banging sound, but absolutely there is not. And I have no clue why that is the case. That hospital is a really special place. From later experiences there, I have come to possible conclusions as to what kind of paranormal things occur. So, I've always had hyper-realistic dreams. I also have always believed that my dreams are how God talks to me. I know that sounds a little crazy. Regardless, the other night I had a dream that I believe is a sign. I also should say that my walk in faith has been wavering in the past year, and I've also been going to see psychics a few times a year since last December. Anyway, to the dream. I believe I was on a road trip with a couple of my buddies. We stopped at a little diner in a small town that had a psychic, gimmicky store attached to it. I was waiting for my friends to use the bathroom, and when they both came out, they both said that they wanted to go and do a reading. I said all right, and that I would wait for them to be done. They went through this black-lit corridor through a purple-curtained doorway. They came back out not too long after, all smiling and cheerful. They told me that I should do a reading, but something didn't feel right. I've always been sensitive to energies in general, but there was something about this place. They kept tugging me when all of a sudden the psychic came out. Immediately, all the alarms were going off in my head. She came up to me and got really close to my face. She had these bulging eyes, and her face was full of super white makeup, really heavy eyeshadow and eyeliner. Her hair was a fire truck red, and slicked back into a bun with feathers and things sticking up. She was really freaking me out, but I was like, alright, whatever, so we start. She grabs me by the shoulders, and we make very intense eye contact, and she starts telling me a bunch of things like I have the gift, something that I already know. And we start backing away almost like a dance, and then we both get on all fours and drop down on our bellies, and she starts to slither toward me. Literally, slithering, without using her hands. This is when I know something is actually really up. I stop everything. I stand up, and am telling her that I'm done. She is still slithering toward me. She then slithers all the way up my body until her face meets mine. Then she says, "Let me show you the way." I say no. This makes her super angry, and she picks me up by my throat and keeps chanting, "Let me show you the way, let me show you the way." She starts running with me in her hand, and the room keeps elongating, so she keeps running. Then snakes start coming out of her sides, and they burrow into my skin. I feel the pain of them digging into me and biting me. I'm grabbing onto her wrists, and I scream, "No! There is only one way. God is the way." And I scream this while making eye contact, and she starts screaming bloody murder. And I get the strength to gouge out her eyes with my thumbs. More snakes and spiders begin pouring from her eye sockets, and I scream that again, that God is the way. And that's when I woke up. I work night shift at a 1920s mental hospital. Obviously, countless people have died here for various reasons. Hangings, a murder-suicide beatings, accidental overdose, electroshock therapy, etc. There are 4 floors, with the 4th floor being the well-known hotspot for paranormal activity. Me being security, I have to check it out every once in a while. The 4th floor is essentially an extremely long hallway, approximately 1,800 steps. With housing units, each unit has a 5-inch thick steel door, and there's a window at the very end of the hall. They don't house patients due to the fact that the county took over a while before I started, and it's completely empty by the time 3rd shift rolls around. The 4th floor is also the only floor in the entire complex that is completely off the ground due to the complex being built into a hill. It is also where the electroshock therapy took place a long time ago. This occurrence happened last Wednesday on 3rd shift. I wanted to do a walk through the 4th floor that night around 3 a.m. for no reason other than I was feeling brave. I walk all the way down to the window. Eventually, as I got closer, I started seeing that the window obviously needs cleaning. When I got about 5 feet away, all of a sudden there was a handprint that would have been extremely noticeable from even 15 feet away. I looked at the handprint, turned around, said nope, and walked back down the hall. On my way back from the window, I peek into a side office area with my flashlight just to look. Nothing. Kept going. After a couple seconds, it sounded like someone was running up behind me, so I walked even faster because everything in my body said not to turn around. As I kept walking, I passed by a unit, and as I passed, I heard what sounded like someone punching the door. Put it up to paranoia due to the running I heard prior, that is until I passed another unit. Another loud thud, as if again someone had punched the door. So at this point I start speed walking down the hall, and while I am, I hear footsteps following mine. Mind you, these units are not connected at all, and again, the entire floor is completely empty. That's just one of my experiences. I have also been having dreams of a white, skinny woman in a hospital gown that has black hair with bangs in her face. I always thought she was just a reoccurring person in my dreams until I talked with one of the CNAs that worked tonight in the kids unit. I never brought her up to the CNA. We were just talking about ghosts, and she said that numerous people have said that they've seen the exact woman that I had just explained. We were just talking about ghosts, and she said that numerous people have said that they've seen the exact woman that I just explained. I then explained to the CNA in detail about how she looked in my dreams, and she just went pale and her mouth hung open. Supposedly, this ghost is extremely well known throughout the hospital by various people. People have seen her in mirrors, have been locked in bathrooms, and have seen her just walking around. But in my dreams, she always just appears or runs up to me, grabs me, and screams in my face. There was this one dream in particular where I woke up from a dream to wake up in my duplex's stairway. I walk down the stairs, because that's where my bedroom is, and walk into my bedroom. Once in there, I see my bed, my fiancé sleeping on her side of the bed, and myself also sleeping. In front of my closet, which is on my side of the bed, I see that same woman standing next to my body, just staring at me. I walk up to her, and I get the courage to ask her just who the hell she is. She looks at me, grabs me, screams in my face, then shoves me onto my bed, which is when I officially woke up at 3:15 a.m. I have no clue who this woman is at all, but I still dream about her every now and then. Every single dream is in a different place, but she's just there, and this has been going on since I started working at my job. I want to start by saying that I'm no stranger to odd dreams. I have experienced sleep paralysis many a time throughout my life. I had a dream shadow stalker for years, and I used to have a haunted bed frame that gave me some of the worst night terrors I've ever had. I have shaman blood on my dad's side, and I myself have been studying various aspects of the occult and paranormal for over a decade. But those stories are for another post. I'm just used to this sort of thing. I wanted to express that. That leads me here. Not sure if anyone's felt this as well, but I have been a ball of anxiety lately. Obviously related to the uncertainty in the world and all, yet I still shouldn't feel it this much. The dreams I've been experiencing have been extremely strange. Like I said, I have vivid, lifelike dreams constantly, but typically they're broken up. I have been having Inception-style dreams for the past 2 months every time I go to sleep. Like I'll dream of actually waking up and going about my day, but then I actually wake up. It's so disorientating. Last night, I had a very weird dream. The strangest of them all. I can't recall what I was doing, but I remember distinctly being in a dark, dusty room. The only part I truly know is that there was some kind of box or container with a lid in front of me. Everything was in first person. It felt so real. I lifted the box, and laying in it were 2 dead gray mice. They were stiff and curled towards each other, like a heart almost. That's all I can remember. I only remembered specifically because my significant other said something about a mouse this morning. I did some investigation and read that this could mean a period of financial instability, but was curious to see if anyone else had any ideas. If you lived in Canada, then you know that there's a lot of countryside out here along with forests. Most of the abandoned buildings you might come across are found there. I was 16 when this happened. I grew up mostly in the rougher part of the capital. Yes, even Ottawa has its tough spots, and one is known as Vanier. While it's no Detroit, it's still where most of the poor, along with other drug addicts and homeless, live and stay. I've been through plenty of stuff that a lot of people would say is scary, but this is something that still to this day, at 21 years of age, does not sit well with me. I was with my buddies at a warehouse of sorts. It was pretty deep in the forest. We were drinking and talking when one of my friends brought up the old story of a haunted farm near that spot. He went on about how the guy who got him in brought him there to scare the crap out of him. I want to add that when they went, he did confirm that his friend was the one who was messing with him, but he still said that something was off about it, so we started making jokes. And then I made a joke that got him really serious. I think I said something along the lines of, "There's a ghost in there with Betty White making a porno." He then looks me in the eyes and tells me, "No, something is messed up in there. I don't care what, but I felt it." Me being the jerk that I am, I joked about how he was being the wuss and that the only things you really have to fear is fear itself. He then convinced me to go to this haunted barn. In retrospect, I should have just shut up right there and then. Next thing I know, we're heading to the barn. We get there, and it's me, my friend, plus this guy that I don't really know, but he was with the group. We walk in, the three of us. Me and the other guy start loudmouthing, right? Wild stuff like, "Hey Casper, what's poppin'?" and "First spirit that comes out gets bopped on sight." I'm not joking when I say that we get halfway in when these heavy doors shut on us. Those big barn doors, the old ones that took some effort getting them open in the first place, let alone having them swing closed like that. We go to push them open only to find out that they were stuck. So we immediately turn to my friend and start grilling him over trying to trip us up over some fake ghost crap, while Random that was with me starts turning on his flashlight on his phone. I'm asking where our mutual friend is, who I thought was helping him, until I noticed my friend is straight tearing up, which causes me to start freaking out. And I mean freaking out. I'm banging on the door, trying to get homeboy to help, while big homie is acting like a statue. I get a weird feeling on my shoulder. I start to freeze up, and all I hear to my side is "scared," as if it were some kind of taunt. I spin around, seeing the same scene as from when I had started freaking. The guy pushing on the door, my friend staring off into nothing. As I'm asking if anyone heard that, the guy pushing the door starts spazzing, saying something in Spanish, I think. I grab him, telling him to calm down, while he's giving me this look like he just got shot. I'm sitting there trying to snap him out of his funk. Then my friend starts ramming into the door over and over really hard. I thought he was going to hurt himself. It was dark. I can't tell exactly what was being thrown around, but I can tell you that a lot was going through the air. We just started hearing crashes from all sides. I even got hit with something. I still have a scar to this day on the left side of my chin and my left shoulder. Then the screaming. It was like 3 chicks were getting cut up. It was awful. I won't lie, I'm not going to act tougher than I am. I started passing out for the first time, being the most bizarre feeling. My friend grabs me and the random guy, both of us not seeing that he did get the door open. When we got out, I threw up, while the random dude said something that I didn't catch and then just took off. My friend and I looked at each other and started walking back. The entire way he was explaining that he had no part in this. He kept swearing it up and down. I kept ranting about how that this was impossible, and that there was no lock on the door, so how was it even locked? And that caused him to freak out more. I had to go to the doctor to get stitches for whatever it was that flew into me while we were in there. When I told the doctors what happened, which I had to say what happened, But really, I should have just made something up, because it could have been anything. And when I told them what did happen, they looked at me as if I were crazy upon my explanation. They actually made me go and see a shrink for a bit, due to my outlandish claims. After a while, they let me off the hook, thinking that I wasn't crazy. All I know is that I was sober that night. Last time I checked, 2 beers don't make you trip out. And random dude is refusing to tell us why he was screaming. Now, for a bit of comparison, when I was 15, I had a shotgun pointed at me and then pressed into my stomach, being threatened that they would pull the trigger. But that's simple. I'm about to get blown up, and that's gun plus angry dude equals body. But that night, I could not explain, nor could I control, or fight back. That night fills me with a terror that has changed my life, and I see how rooms and dark places that I didn't know what was happening or how to react to or defend are the reasons to this day that this was one of the most horrifying experiences I have ever had. Don't get me wrong, getting a gun pointed at me got me on the path where I'm trying to change my life. But I can't change not being able to walk in the dark around my house, and my refusal to be in dark rooms. This happened about 13 years ago. I'm currently 28, and my childhood dog died in early high school for me. This wasn't too long after. Upon looking up what this is, it was most likely a false awakening, but still gives me chills to this day. I shared a room with my older brother, who was a pretty heavy sleeper once he got there. He'd usually be up playing video games all night, and I got used to being able to fall asleep through the sounds of him yelling at COD players for using noob tubes and all that good stuff. One night I woke up feeling the foot of my bed sink in like someone was down there. When I looked, I noticed a small child sitting with his back toward me. The child seemed to be wearing a black shirt with white horizontal stripes. I immediately thought to myself, alright, fuck that, and went back to sleep. I woke up what felt like a few hours later, and he was now standing at the foot of my bed, facing me, holding my dead dog's head in his hands. The child was surrounded by an extremely dark aura, so much so that I didn't gather any details on skin complexion or anything. I immediately lost my shit and freaked out, falling out of my bed. This part creeped me out because the fall was very detailed. I knocked over an acoustic guitar that I had on a stand near my bed when I fell out, and my brother shuffled in his sleep due to the noise. When I tried to wake him up, he mumbled, half asleep, that we needed to get more Pepsi, not an encounter with him that would surprise me at all, and went back to sleep. I then scrambled back into my bed, all while this kid was just watching me, holding my dog's head throughout. I fell back asleep, and then had my real awakening that morning. The guitar was in its stand, and everything was normal. I ended up not telling anybody about this dream. The really fucked up part, and why this particularly bad dream still gives me chills, has to do with the fact that my dog was buried in my backyard, in a little side yard that always had some really weird energy to it. Months later, my friends and I were hanging out, and we usually smoke weed in my backyard close to this side yard area. We had made our way inside and were munching and watching movies when my good friend Joe said that he needed to run to the backyard and get his phone. He went out to get it with his usual demeanor, but I heard his footsteps running full sprint back to the back door into the house. His skin was pale, and he was visibly shaken up. I asked him what was wrong. His response? Dude, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I just saw a little kid standing where your dog is buried. I have these dreams sometimes. Sometimes they're warnings, and other times they're just odd. I started noticing that they weren't normal when I was about 8, and I started having the same dream every night. My parents were freshly divorced, and my mom had moved into this yellow house. The heater didn't work, and every window was broken. She wouldn't allow us near the windows because she was afraid we'd get cut. This house was mostly normal during the day. The buzz of the fan above the stove while Mom cooks, me and my sister playing, the TV on, just seemed normal. But every night, that dream would come back. It wasn't a bad dream, just one that I really don't get. A native man, who looked like he was probably a chief based on the headdress, would walk into the house through the front door. He would look at me for a long time before opening every cabinet and drawer, and then would exit through the back door. I had this dream for a week or two before telling my mom. But I went to her one day and I said, every night I have a dream that someone opens all the drawers, cabinets, and doors, and it's really starting to creep me out. She looked at me and told me that she had woke up and had to shut every door and cabinet and drawer that morning. Then, when I was about 10, my uncle was hospitalized. All of our family was staying together in one house so that we could all help each other out. Our uncle was a big part of our lives and really kept the family together. The adults went to visit him, and all us kids stayed home with one adult who stayed behind. When they came back, they told us very little about my uncle's condition. They just said he can't wait to be back home. That night, I dreamt that I went alone to find out what had really happened. I walked into the hospital room where my uncle was and I said, "Hey uncle, it's me, your niece. How are you?" And he said, "Who are you? I don't have any family. I don't remember them." I spent the rest of the dream trying to convince him that I was real. It smelled like hand sanitizer and old people. I woke up crying and screaming. I don't know why, but I knew it wasn't just a dream. So I asked my mom and aunt, "Why did you lie to me? Uncle doesn't even remember us." They asked me how I knew. I dreamt another time that my mom was wearing all red. She was so confident and pretty, and I remember telling her in the dream that she looked really nice. And then her boyfriend came out. He started fighting with her, asking why she was wearing that slutty color. "Are you cheating on me? You know I'll kill you if you do, right? Now you know what? I don't want to be with a woman that dresses like that. Have fun being single." I woke back up, and she was wearing all red. I begged her to change. I said, "Mom, something bad is going to happen," because I remembered how much she loved him, even if I hated him. She didn't listen, and a few minutes later I was hearing, "Are you cheating on me? You know I'll kill you if you do, right?" All over again. Things like this stopped for a while. Everything was peaceful, and I didn't read into dreams too much. Until last year, anyway. Last year I had a strange dream that my current boyfriend was in. At the time of this dream, we were only acquaintances. We had just barely met. The dream was unlike any of the others, because I wasn't all the way asleep while I was having it, and I found that I could not move. Other things happened too, but I'll get into that later. The dream starts with me walking to the bathroom because I had to pee. Then I make the decision to leave the bathroom door open because no one is home. I have the quick thought to myself, "Don't leave that door open," but I ignore it. It's gotten to the point where it's time for me to clean up and wash my hands, but when I look out the door as I'm about to get up, I see my current boyfriend. His head is tilted to the side, and he's saying, "She's here." He says it very creepily and matter-of-fact-like, but it doesn't sound like him at all. He continues and repeats himself. I say, "Who? Who is here?" But when I engage in the conversation he's trying to have, what he says changes. He starts saying, "Her heart is here." At that point, across the hall from the bathroom, my bedroom door swings open to show me a little girl. But she's not a little girl at all. She took my voice. I tried calling out for everyone. My dad, my sister, the neighbors. Nothing would come out until I called for my mother. But calling for my mother was useless. She lived an hour and a half away. I woke up calling for her. I figured it was a sign to visit, but we weren't on the best terms. Anyway, around the time Halloween was supposed to be celebrated, my cats started acting really weird in my room. I started feeling uncomfortable staying in there. I couldn't breathe in there after that dream. My cats would scratch at the walls, and sometimes would hiss at my closet for no reason. On Halloween night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the dreams I was gonna have, so I took NyQuil and passed out in a record 17 minutes. I figured I'd be asleep all through the night, but I woke up at 3 a.m. I saw someone standing next to my closet. It looked like my mom, but I wasn't sure. I shut my eyes and refused to open them because I was terrified. When I woke up, without telling my mom anything about what had happened, I asked her what she had dreamt of. And she told me, "I dreamt I was standing next to your closet. Something's not right about that closet. Maybe you should come visit for a while and give yourself some space from there." I want to make it very clear, I never told her anything about this closet. I didn't tell her that I saw her when she dreamt she was there. I didn't tell her about the girl. I didn't tell her about the cats. So I came to visit after about a month, around Thanksgiving. I had been sleeping in Dad's living room or going to friends to avoid my bedroom. I couldn't wait to sleep in a bed. Everything at Mom's was wonderful. We had movie night, talked about things, and just got caught up. So when I came back to Dad's, I actually hadn't slept. I was so happy to be at Mom's, I had just stayed up the whole time. So when I got back, I was pretty exhausted. I went to my room because I was feeling better about it. I turned on my nightlight, still terrified of the dark, and opened my bedroom door. I will die in a fire before I shut that door when I'm inside the room, and laid down to go to sleep. Instantly, the dream took me, before I was even all the way gone. I felt someone hug me and start to kiss my neck. It felt like someone I knew, and I wasn't bothered by it. But the second I relaxed into the hug, it got tighter and tighter until I couldn't breathe. I realized my nightlight wasn't on anymore, and the faint glow from the hallway wasn't much. But it was enough for me to see the closet door open and these odd creatures come out. Short, undefined. Any lines that defined them were just white lines on their shadowy bodies. I felt that they were going to hurt me, and again I was terrified, but I just woke up, and then it was over. I looked over though, and I realized that my closet door was still open, and my nightlight was off, even though I had shut that door and turned the light on beforehand. I would like to share my recent experience. This is absolutely true and in no way fabricated. I have been shaken up immensely and my perspective on reality has definitely changed. I live in India and my family is Protestant Christian. My upbringing and the things taught to me in terms of faith have included an aspect of the supernatural and the spiritual. Though it was always told to me that demons and spirits of darkness exist, I was always a skeptic. I believed in proof, evidence, and logic. In my opinion, exorcisms were staged and everything about it was fake. Until I had what seems to be my own personal experience with the demonic. This happened about a week ago. I was on my bed, playing a racing game on my phone at 2 a.m. The lights were off, and the only light was that of my phone. I usually put my AirPods on and keep my volume on full as I enjoyed the loud engine revving sounds of the game. I started feeling an ache in my back, and this made me think I was having another bout of kidney stone pain. It runs in my family. My way of coping with it is to just ignore it and move on with things. I've had multiple stones in my body, so I have learnt to manage the discomfort well by now. As I continued with the game, I started feeling breathless as the air was heavy. It came to a point where I thought something was definitely wrong. There was a dull pain in my stomach and head, too. The sounds and music of the game I was playing became very muffled and scary. I managed to pull out my headphones and lie down. I laid out on the bed, on my back, looking up at the ceiling, wondering what was going on. My wife is working abroad for now, and I really wanted to ring her. I was not able to do that, however, because somehow logic and common sense had taken a back seat at that moment. I just wasn't able to think clearly. My palms and forehead were covered in sweat, and felt crushed, like under weight of something terribly heavy. I honestly thought I was about to die. My mom had visited me in March of this year and has not been able to since leave and head back to her own house due to the lockdown. So she was sleeping in the guest room and usually fast asleep at that hour. My mom is a very deep sleeper and rarely gets up for anything in the night. During all this madness that I was going through, she just woke up and came to my door and knocked. I heard the knocks, and I wanted to say, "Please come in and help me," but my mind was too confused to do anything. She heard some groaning-like sounds coming from me and decided to let herself in. When I looked at her, I wanted to say help, but apparently I kept saying, "Just let me be. Let me die in peace." My mom told me this later. When she saw me in the state that I was, without any hesitation, she touched my head and said, "In the name of Yeshua, I bind you, rebuke you, and cast you out." I felt the immediate sensation of wanting to puke. I rushed to the loo and did so. Instantly, I felt better, and my mind began working correctly. I could think straight and had no trouble breathing. The whole recovery didn't take more than a couple of minutes. While I know that this can be dismissed as a simple case of indigestion or acidity, food poisoning, or even an anxiety attack, here are some reasons why it's got to be more. 1. The probability of my mom walking in that time was very low. Later, when I asked her why she came in at that hour, she simply said, "Because I felt like I should." Like a prompting in my spirit. 2. Why would I say things like, "Just let me die"? Any person in need of medical attention will cry for help rather than wanting to be left alone. 3. Why did I need to puke just after my mom said those words? 4. I had eaten dinner at 5 p.m. If it had something to do with that, why would it surface at 2 in the morning the next day? And 5. About a month before all this happened, I had a nightmare about an entity in my room. Something that looked like a black being with red eyes and teeth like a wolf, grinding its teeth at me or making low-pitched growls. I was scared after that, but I had dismissed it and moved on. I am really beginning to think that what I went through was a spiritual demonic oppression, which retreated due to the compulsion from a higher spiritual authority. I work in a place with 5 floors and a basement. It used to be a house for nuns and priests. I have divided the story into small parts describing everything I've seen on each floor. I got called up for a night shift since a colleague called in sick. I've never done a night shift here, so I took up the opportunity to see what it was like. 4th floor. Doing your rounds isn't the creepiest thing at all. The creepiest thing is going down the stairs again. You will see a black figure walking the hallway. Just your average shadow, you know. Well, thing is, the lift sometimes randomly goes to that floor during the night, as if someone is calling it. 3rd floor. Doing your rounds gets a little weirder here, since it seems as though you aren't alone whilst on the floor. You will hear footsteps and see shadows on the wall walking past you. Second floor. Exactly the same as third floor, except for one painting. It has a woman in it that sometimes changes position or even completely disappears. First floor. You will sometimes hear the piano play a D note on the floor above you. Main floor. There is a black leather couch in the hallway where you will sometimes find a see-through man sitting with a cigar and newspaper. He smiles and disappears when you greet him. Basement. The helpful poltergeist resides here. This is the place where, before my current company took up the building, the morgue was. There currently are our storage rooms, but the rooms aren't marked with what is in them. But that doesn't matter, because the night shift always gets knocks on the door to indicate where the item is. My grandparents died about 10 years ago. They both died peacefully of old age and left an old house in a countryside. That house has a lot of great memories. My best Christmas and birthdays. Despite that, recently I've started having nightmares that would always have the house in them. Sometimes someone's chasing me, other times there are ghosts. It's always basically a horror movie scenario. Being religious, I thought it was about time to visit my grandparents' graves and light a candle. It's about a 3-hour drive, so I decided to visit them and crash at their house for the night. Well, I'm never doing that again. It was still bright outside when I arrived. I went inside to open the windows and clean up a bit. That's when I heard a weird sound. It was as if someone was walking in the room, but no one was there except me. I was spooked, but I convinced myself that there must be rats or other creatures in the attic. I managed to stay calm and rational, and spent the rest of the evening watching YouTube in bed. That's when the fun started. The internet connection is terrible there. You kinda have to walk around the room to catch 4G like some sort of Wi-Fi. Like many times before, my internet lagged, and I ended up sitting in silence. This is when I heard it, loud and clear. There was someone in the kitchen, and they turned on the light switch. I was sure it was that switch, because whenever you turn on the light in the kitchen, it made this loud click sound. I literally froze. I was in the middle of nowhere, and I was about to be killed by some maniac. All the knives were in the kitchen too, and I only had pepper spray in my bag. Then the intruder started walking, slow steps as if they were just wandering around. I thought I will die from fear, and I didn't know for how long that I was frozen, but it really did feel like forever. I was literally waiting to be killed. I don't know how much more time passed, but it was long enough that my muscles started spasming from being so intense and not moving. I gathered all courage, hoping that the intruder had left, and somehow managed to go to the kitchen. The light was on as expected, but the person had already left. I ran to the door, expecting to see it wide open, but to my surprise, it was shut down and locked, as I had left it. There was no sign of entry. I'm never going back alone. While I was growing up, around the age of 3 until 6 or 7, I had an invisible friend. He would only show up every once in a while. I thought maybe he was lonely and also needed a friend. I disliked the feeling of someone not having a friend when I was little, so I gently worked hard to be his friend, just so that he would have someone. Usually he would appear whenever my stepmom would be mean to us, and we were left alone for a bit afterward, or when I was scared or was having a paranormal experience, which at the time I didn't understand. My teacher was fond of me and told my dad that I was special and could grow into either a very bad or a very good person. While the other kids would play on the playground together, I would sit on the hill and just enjoy the grass and trees and wind, and my teacher would sit down next to me, enjoying it in silence as well. I remember one time the other kids were on the playground and, without being told to, stopped playing and sat down with us, and we all just sat on the hill enjoying the breeze. It was a pretty nice memory, just all of us enjoying the silence and having a moment, until the school bell rang. My dad didn't think that the little boy was fake, while my stepmom tried to get me to see a specialist. My dad did eventually take me to a specialist in order to make my stepmom happy because they constantly argued about it. I remember that at our last appointment, I was in the waiting room. My dad opened the door and went into her office, and I remember as my dad's back was turned to me that the specialist concluded that nothing was wrong with me, that I was just a normal kid. My dad said something along the lines of, "I thought so, thank you," and he took me out for ice cream afterward. My dad later opened up to me after his divorce and said that in every generation some of the kids have gifts and that some people don't like what they can't understand, and that's why he thought my old friend wasn't made up. To this day, I don't know if he was a ghost or an invisible friend I made up as a little girl. But I do remember that he had his own personality that I was not in control of. He never really talked about anything, like about his life, even if I asked him questions. He just wanted to play, or he would show up and say, "It's going to be okay." I remember after a while, as my stepmom hated it more and more, he sort of slowly went away. Sometimes I would call out for him, which I didn't do before, and he wouldn't show up. Sometimes when I would cry, I would sort of wait for him, hoping a little bit that he would show up. But he never did. I eventually forgot about the little boy until one day in middle school. It felt like something which was not very good was in my bedroom with me that night. The house was oddly quiet. I figured I was being silly, so I fell asleep. That night, I had a dream that I was inside of a broken-down city as a girl again. It was a misty night with puddles on the road. I could even feel the rain falling lightly on my skin. I remember that my hair was wet. The city seemed to be empty. The street lights looked old, and there weren't any lights on anywhere. Many of the building's windows were broken. Inside of the rooms were dusty and unkept. I also noticed that there wasn't any furniture inside of them or lights or doors. It was just rooms. I called out, and my voice kind of echoed as the rain tapped the ground. I noticed rather quickly that I wasn't alone. Something heard me. As a figure of something slowly crept in the distance on the street behind me, I looked closer, but it wasn't a person. I heard a loud screech, and I instantly started to run as fast as I could in the opposite direction. Whatever was inhabiting that city wasn't expecting me. Suddenly, I was being chased by a bunch of shadowy, semi-human-looking things. They ran fast and would jump from the wall of one building to another building, clinging onto the sides, the bricks falling and hitting the streets and the sidewalks behind me. They nearly caught up to me until I turned the corner and started to run over to an old wooden fence on the outskirts of the city. I felt the water on the grass, and I think I slipped at least once. I saw the little boy on the other side of the dark brown, worn-down fence, and he said, "Take my hand." I did, and as we ran away through an open field in an attempt to reach some woods on the other side, those things were moments away from catching us. Their claws dug into the ground. Some of the speckles of dirt flew past my face. Then I woke up. On my ceiling above my bed there was a huge man in armor and medium-length brown hair. His hair moved and little parts of his clothes moved with it. as if they were submerged. But it didn't look to me like he had been near water. He had a silk cloth. It was either red or purple. The only way I remember it is because part of it had floated steady near his hair and face. Light seemed to emit not only from his body but from underneath his skin as well. As I looked at his face, he had an expression of warmth and calm, and it felt like we knew each other. He seemed so familiar. Only the area from the top of his head until about his waist or a little below it could fit within the space of my ceiling. I remember his eyes. It was like he were trying to tell me something, that he was the little boy the entire time, and it was going to be okay. The only way that I can describe the feeling of familiarity I had is, you know the feeling when you see someone after a while and you realize you knew each other when you were kids? Eventually, after what felt like a longer time than what it probably was, the man faded away, and it was just me in my empty room. That morning when I went upstairs to fix myself some breakfast, my uncle was talking in the living room about having a dream. I didn't really catch what his dream was about, though, until he mentioned that he woke up in the middle of the night when he heard aggressive scratching and banging on his door. My dad didn't believe him, so he brought my dad and my sister and I downstairs to show us that it was true, to show my dad that he wasn't making it up. There were long, deep scratches on the other side of his bedroom door from the hallway. I can't explain what happened or what had made those scratch marks. I usually don't open up about my experiences. I honestly haven't had the courage to until a few days ago. Rarely have I shared them. I still haven't told my family about my dream, or the man I had seen either, but they still talk about the scratches. I was a jail nurse for about 3 years in a correctional facility that housed approximately 1,300 inmates. Loved the job, would have stayed longer, but administration sucked. Anyhow, that's another story. I worked night shift, and I've had some really creepy things happen that just could not be rationally explained. I worked both booking and infirmary, but the majority of the incidents occurred in the infirmary. Okay, so I was there maybe a month. Not a new nurse, but new to corrections. Anyone who has spent any time in a jail will tell you that when those heavy doors slam shut, it is a very distinctive, definitive, loud noise. To get into the infirmary, you have to have a key or be buzzed in by a central control. So I'm sitting at my desk, and I hear the metal door outside my office click, like someone from Central has unlocked it, and it opens about halfway, and then just slammed shut. Now in my office, there is a huge glass window so that the nursing staff can see any inmates that are about to enter. When the door slammed, I thought it was just one of the officers messing around, and I jumped up and went to the window, but no one was there. I called Central, and the officer that answered sounded like I just woke him from a sound sleep, and I said, "Ha ha, very funny." He had no idea what I was talking about. And I knew this officer, and I was surprised that he would go along with any type of prank, because frankly, he was kind of a jerk-off with absolutely no sense of humor. After that, I just thought it was some mechanical glitch. I sat down, and everything just changed. It felt colder, and I sensed that I was being watched. I was just all around uncomfortable. I took my stethoscope from around my neck and put it on the desk and left my office to go into the medical department. I stayed in medical for a few talking to the staff in there, and then went back to my office. When I walked in, I went to grab my stethoscope off the desk to check an inmate, and it wasn't there. I looked on the desk, on the side, underneath. It just wasn't there. I should mention that when I left my office, I did lock the door as per protocol, and I'm the only one on the shift with the key. Now I think I'm going crazy, so I start looking everywhere and I cannot find it. In my office there is a large closet that holds all supplies that is also locked, with the key being on the set of keys that I carry. Anyhow, later in the shift I needed to go into the closet and get something. I really don't remember what. And sitting in the middle of the floor is my stethoscope. I picked it up, and the heavy metal door outside my office clicks again, opens halfway, and slams shut. I locked the closet, locked my office, and went out for a smoke. I was scared shitless, but I had responsibilities and patients to look after. So I go back in, and I swear the whole atmosphere was lighter. It was warmer, and I felt way more comfortable. When my shift was over, the central officers rewound the tapes for me, and I saw the doors just open and slam shut with not a single person near them or in the hallway. I wish I could say that that was the last time it happened, or that I got more comfortable with it. I did not, because each time it happened it seems that the doors slammed harder, and that uncomfortable feeling lasted longer and longer, almost as if I were being stalked. Things that went missing were found in different parts in the jail. My pen case in the women's wing, my med sheets in solitary central control room, my portable blood pressure cuff in the kitchen. And each and every time something of mine would show up in another part of the jail, the officers and I would look at the tapes and see no one. Remember, I said I felt like I was being stalked. Well, that's because all these things happened to me, but no other nurse who worked nights. Not one other nurse who worked on my days off had anything happen either. No doors slam, click open, shut, no stuff moving. It was just me. Every officer and every one of the medical staff who worked there well before I got there swore up and down that this kind of incident never ever had occurred before. It got to the point for me that I started just not staying in my office. I would just get all the stuff that I needed for my shift and sit at the officer's desk. I did that until I left there and got another job. I haven't had anything like that happen ever again. I remember around 12 years ago, when I was around 11 or 12, I stayed over at my grandmother's a lot to keep her company after my grandfather passed away. I was lying in bed one night. I had just turned the TV off to go to sleep when I heard a creaking sound outside the door, but I just thought it was Grandma going to the bathroom since she had to walk past my room to get there. Then, I heard the handle being pulled down, and again I just thought it was my grandma, maybe just coming in to say goodnight before bed. As I looked toward the door, I saw a large, white hand grip the edge of the door, and instantly I knew it wasn't her. I was too terrified to say or do anything, so I just kept watching as the door slowly opened. Because of the window at the top of the stairs outside the room, there was just enough light from the streetlights outside coming through to see what it was. It was a tall, slightly transparent figure. It just stood in the doorway for what could have been seconds or minutes, or who really knows how long. I couldn't look away, and I refused to shut my eyes, even to blink, but of course, I had to eventually, and once I blinked, the figure was gone, with only the open door as proof that it wasn't my imagination. To this day, I still don't know what it was. I told my friends before, and they said it could have been my grandfather's ghost, but it was way too tall and skeletal looking to be my grandfather in my opinion, and I felt a deep, sinister feeling from it that couldn't be further from the warm, loving person that my grandfather had been. I've had a few odd experiences with things before that I could chalk up to imagination or overreacting, but as they say, you have to see it to believe it. And after that day, I certainly believe. Ever since, it's had me wondering what else could be out there. When I was a kid, I lived in a little one-story house with my dad, my older sister, and my stepmom. It was a nice and quiet place. We had hardwood floors and there was a hallway leading from the living room into where the bedrooms were. It was a rather dark hallway which turned to the left and led to a guest bedroom and my parents' bedroom. The reason it was dark was because there was just a single dim light on the ceiling between the two bathrooms and the second bedroom, which was at the end of the hallway before it turned left. There was also an attic door right above the master bedroom's door. We never really opened it. It's weird. It just didn't feel like we had permission to, even though we did and could use it any time. I can recall one day after school I returned home to the house being empty. My sister was at a friend's house and my parents went out to try and surprise us with McDonald's before we came back home. I remember calling out my sister's name to see if she was home as well as my mom and dad's name, and no one responded. I went into my parents' bedroom where they had a computer. I sat down and started to turn it on, hoping to get a few minutes of gaming in before my parents came back. As I sat there, the room felt like it was getting darker, but I told myself that my eyes were just adjusting to the computer monitor in front of me. The computer which was taking a rather long time to boot up. Back then, I was maybe 10 years old. I looked around the room to see if my eyes would adjust, but it was still extremely dark even though the light was on, and it just seemed like they couldn't. It also started to feel colder and colder, and when I looked up again, the ceiling was completely black, and the darkness shrouded the light above me with a thick black haze. Immediately, I looked back at the computer to compose myself and tried to ignore it. I told myself I was just a kid that was creeped out for no reason. As I focused on the monitor, the room was cold and quiet. And suddenly, a woman's voice whispered shortly and sternly, my name. I could feel the wind on my ear and the pressure of someone holding my shoulder. I bolted out of the room, and moments later my dad came through the front door smiling and holding a kid's meal in his hand, asking me how my day at school went. I didn't tell him what had just happened. A little while passed, and my dad began having his own experiences in the house. Sometimes he would fall asleep watching his favorite TV shows on the sofa. In the middle of the night, when we had all fallen asleep, he would wake up and hear footsteps walking around the living room. He would also hear chains being dragged across the floor. At the time, we also had a dog. He said that our dog's head would follow the footsteps, and that was how he knew he wasn't just imagining it. The footsteps would lead into the kitchen, pausing for a moment before something dropped from the kitchen counter. Sometimes when one of us was alone in the house, we would hear little girls giggling and laughing in the bathroom at the end of the hall. I remember my dad talking to some of the adults in a serious tone. He said he could see the shadows of two people from underneath the door. He would open it after no reply, and there would be no one there. He would then notice that he was alone in the house. This was a common incident that many of us had experienced ourselves. My stepmom didn't like children, but she hid it very well from my dad. When he would leave for work, he would leave for 15 to 20-hour shifts. Sometimes she would put me in the basement and said if I couldn't behave myself like a person, I would be treated like an animal. The thing about being downstairs is that she would turn off the lights so that you would be downstairs and it would be completely black. It would feel like something was staring at me from the corner of the room. Something that was slowly creeping closer and closer to where I was sitting. Sometimes I would hear feet dragging in the distance, accompanied by tapping sounds similar to fingernails tapping on the concrete floor. This only happened soon after the sun had set and the basement was once again too dark to even see my hand waving in front of my face. As the sounds came closer and closer, I would hug my legs in a fetal position. At that point, I would sing a song from Anastasia, the one that my sister and I used to sing together, and hearing my voice made me feel less alone in that situation. Even as I felt the air thicken and the feeling of something weighing in next to me, waiting for me to open my eyes and take a look. Each time that I did manage to open my eyes in an attempt to see what it was, it would still be so dark that I didn't know if something was there or not. I learned how to toughen up and deal with that thing by treating it like a bully. Just don't let it get to you, don't let it bother you, I would tell myself. But the utter relief of the light turning on and being allowed to come back upstairs and watching my dad pull into the driveway was the best feeling in the world. Another one of my stepmom's favorite punishments would once again be in the basement. She would have my sister and I fold the clothes from the laundry machine. She would later tell one of us to go upstairs and then proceed to throw all of the clothes on the ground and then tell us to fold it again by ourselves. Downstairs, my sister and I knew that something was not right. The room had a TV and a small, dusty sofa. The door would always be open, and it felt like someone or something wanted you to come inside. It was almost magnetic. At times, we would have to go into the basement room whenever my stepmom had her friends over. We had to be quiet downstairs without a peep, or else she would get upset. Due to the giggling ghosts who were upstairs, we always seemed to get the blame, and were punished according to her mood. When I turned 12 or so, 2 of my dad's brothers moved into the house with us. One of my uncles slept in the guest bedroom, while their other uncle slept in the basement room. Sometimes we would go down there to see if he was hungry. When we entered the room, my uncle would be laying on the sofa with his eyes open, not blinking, and unresponsive. This would go on for a good hour or so. My dad said there wasn't anything downstairs, but he rarely went down there at all. My uncle said that there was something evil, and that it was trying to get into his body. My other uncle, who slept in the guest bedroom, said that when he was asleep he had a dream where a Confederate soldier without eyes kept screaming that they had been taken from him. He woke to see a floating blob of light right in front of his face. I remember one night as my sister and I were falling asleep, my dad kept yelling down the hall from the living room for us to stop talking and get some rest. He said it a few more times before my sister and I said we weren't talking. He then turned off the hallway light and said goodnight. Moments later, I opened my eyes, and behind our bedroom door was a little girl in old pajamas. She had long black hair and nearly blended in with the shadows. I stared at her and then covered my head with my blanket. Later on, 2 of my cousins moved in after my uncles moved out. They had our old bedroom, and my sister and I took the guest bedroom. My cousins were both boys, and we were supposed to help them get used to living with us. They kept fighting with each other. The youngest one would climb into my bed in the middle of the night because he didn't want to fight with his older brother. We had a lock on our bedroom door, and that made him feel better. Also, he did mention that the bedroom scared him, but I didn't ask why. Eventually, the oldest one started to walk around the house at night. We found makeshift weapons like a stick with sharp rocks on it, and a strong thread with something sharp on it as well. He said he was going to kill our stepmother and everyone else in the house. He was maybe just 12 or 13 at the time. Eventually, law enforcement became involved, and he was deemed insane. Once my dad found out about my stepmother's abuse, he swiftly divorced her, and we moved. We never saw her again. One thing I remember is while we were moving out, the landlord stopped by and had baked us all cookies. My dad asked them if anyone had died in the house. The landlords were shocked and said, "Yeah, there was an older lady who died from depression upstairs in the attic." They then asked my dad how he knew. He told them about our experiences. They also mentioned that the house was built on an old battleground. To this day, sometimes I drive past the house and think about knocking on the tenant's door. I don't think this was paranormal, but it felt so real that it undid many of the knots in my heart. My father passed away 21 years ago, when I was 20 years old, leaving behind his mother, my grandmother, wife, my mom, and a daughter, me. 2 years before his death, my father had urged my grandmother to sell her small home and shift with us so that we could look after her in her old age. He built a decent house, considering he came from a very poor background, that we had to sell off after he passed away. My grandmother passed away 2 years ago. I often used to think about how our life would have been had he been still alive. He was an honest man, but in a powerful position. When he passed away, I was still in college and unmarried, with no exposure to the outside world. Had he been alive for a few more years, I could have used his guidance to fulfill my career plans. He was the only earning member of the family. After he passed away, nothing remained the same. We all struggled financially, emotionally, and ultimately physically. Then I got married to a verbally, financially abusive man. But I saw this dream only yesterday, never before it. I had not been thinking about him or of any of my difficulties before I went to bed. In the dream, I was in my grandmother's house, which again we had sold 23 years ago. She had passed away, but my father was alive. He was sadly looking at the empty house from his childhood. I asked him what he planned to do with the house. He said he would probably sell it, but he sounded very sad as he said it. Then I suggested if we should keep the house and just rent it out. This way, we could return to it whenever we want and have a financial backup too. My father said that in the face of financial difficulty, we have a bigger home to fall back on. But he seemed relieved that he didn't have to sell his childhood home. When I woke up, I realized that it had all felt so real, as if I had lived an alternate life. It was what life could have been. I cried, but I also felt that I had been lucky to be able to live in that life. Does anyone believe in alternate lives here? Do you think my soul had made a trip to an alternative life somehow? I work in a hospital as a nurse. I was on a row of nights, which I dread. I ended up having 5 patients, 2 of which were under care for cancer. There are 2 events in here from 2 separate nights. 1. The night started normally as I assessed and passed meds to the patients and did my charting and other night duties, stocking and other stuff. Just around 11 p.m., one of my palliative patients started ringing, complaining that there was a kid running into the room laughing and playing when they should be in bed. I checked the room to make sure that there was no one in there and reassured him that there were no children in the hospital area where we were. I made him comfortable and left the room. He rang again. I went back to the room to see what he rang for. Agitated, he said that he was just looking to rest comfortably and that people should keep their children under control and not let them jump on his bed playing and laughing. This time, I got the chills, but again, I reassured him that there were no children since it wasn't the pediatric ward. I told him that I would bring him a sleeping pill to help him fall asleep, but that I would be a few minutes. I start walking back toward the desk and medication room to grab the pill. A bell rang. I turned around and saw that the indicator above his door was flashing. Slightly annoyed, I walked back to his room. He was agitated in his bed again, and I asked him what was wrong. He again complained about the kid. He said he was just in there again. I leaned over the bed and calmly explained, "There are no children in this hospital. Look, you need to get some rest." He replied loudly, "He is standing right behind you." I stood up instantly and slowly turned around. Creeped out, I turned to face the patient, and before I could speak, he says, "He ran into the closet," referring to the lockers where patients can store items. I slowly opened the locker and saw that his jacket was swinging, but no one was in there. I turned and told him that there was no one. I rushed into the med room to give him that sleeping pill. 2. This will be a short one. I came out of one of my patients' rooms and was sanitizing my hands, but facing the wall. As I was rubbing my hands together, I noticed the shadow of someone walk out of the room next door, and then walk into the room across from it, as I turned to see. I went into the room where I had seen it go. I asked the patient, who wasn't one of mine, if anyone had come in there. She replied no, but with a shaky voice. I checked the room to make sure that there was indeed no one. I left that room and went into the room where it had came from. I looked around, but again, no one was in there. I checked the patient, who again was not assigned to me, and found that he had died. He was palliative. I walked out of the room immediately to inform the nurse who had the patient that he had died. She asked me to come with her to check the patient because she had been having creepy vibes every time she went in there. I agreed, and we went. She did the assessment where you listen for a full minute. When she was done, we heard knocking on the wall. She said, "See, it's creepy." I didn't think anything of it until she said, "We are on the 4th floor, and on the other side of that wall is the outside of the building." We quickly left the room. 4 of us came in there to shroud the body. The dream I just had was one of the most prophetic that I have ever had. I have gotten into the habit of listening to historical documentaries while I sleep, and one of them just made its way into my dream. Let me explain. I was sitting on a bed in a broken-down old house when I started hearing an animal screaming in pain outside. I run to the window, and I see an older man, and who I can only assume is his wife outside this house, with a strongly malnourished panther that is on the ground in front of them. The older man has a whip, and is raising it up before I yell to stop, and the panther jumps up, climbs up the side of the wall to my window, and the large jungle cat climbs inside. I start to close the window, and the man starts to scream to give me his animal back to him. I only flip him the bird, and then turn to help the animal. I leave to go get some meat and a bed and whatever else I think the animal might need when I get back. It's nighttime. I walk back in, and I see the panther laying with his head on my pillow, asleep. I turn around to put the stuff down and close the door, and when I turn back, he's sitting up, staring at me. I apologize to him for waking him up, and I show him the meat. I tell him that I don't want him chewing on me next time he gets hungry, and he says, "I couldn't." At this point, I'm completely caught off guard, and I just stare at him. He continued, "You saved me. I would never eat you. My name is Ramses." I smile at him and introduce myself while placing the meat in front of him. As he finishes up, he looks up at me and says, "Thank you. I wish I could be here on happier terms, but I have a message about this world and all of its humans. This world will have to face judgment in an endless desert. So much was given, and so much was ruined. Now there will be nothing. I'm sorry." I let him know that I understood, and I thank him for his message. Suddenly, the house around me begins to shake and crumble. Just before a large piece of wall falls on me, I wake up. In August of 2013, I visited the small town of Clouderville, Louisiana, to investigate the cellar of a tiny, abandoned farmhouse. I was drawn to this place because in 1932, a woman was murdered here, and in 1933, her husband mysteriously vanished. While this situation alone was not of particular interest to me, the story surrounding it captured my attention. The following is the history behind the haunted candle of Clouderville as I have come to understand it. In 1932, the farmhouse was owned by Adam and Emily Benoit. Adam was a farmer, a hard man, and not a particularly likable one. Although he did run a successful farm, he was also an alcoholic and spent most nights at the local pub. His wife Emily was a quiet woman who had no social ties, and instead spent all of her time at home, alone. In June of 1932, Emily was found murdered in the cellar. Police records state that she had been struck from behind with a blunt object. They were able to determine that she did not die immediately. She had crawled from the place of impact to the back of the cellar. In her outstretched hand was a candle holder. It would have been the only source of light. Adam Benoit was naturally listed as the primary suspect, but he had an alibi. He was with his friend that night at the pub. The friend was a local drunkard with a less than stellar reputation, but nevertheless, Adam's alibi was accepted. The murder of Emily Benoit, to this day, remains unsolved. Early in February of 1933, Adam Benoit was reported missing. He had not been seen at the pub for several days, which was very out of the ordinary for the recent widower. Police investigation led to the cellar in which Emily had met her demise. The lead officer wrote that he had heard a man sobbing, but he found the cellar to be empty. The only sign that anyone had been there was a single candle burning against the back wall. The officer also wrote that upon extinguishing the candle, the sobbing faded. It's also in the record that the police officer found the word "alone" carved into the wall. The whereabouts of Adam Benoit also went unsolved. He was never seen again. The following year, in 1934, the farmhouse was purchased by a man named John Morell. When he was not seen or heard from in several weeks, police officers once again were led to the cellar to investigate. They found the exact same candle flickering dimly from the shadows. The officers once again reported hearing a man sobbing, and noted having seen the outline of a female form in the weak light. When the candle was extinguished, the voices stopped, and the woman's shadow disappeared. Once again written on the wall was the word "alone," only written out 3 times, rather than just the one. Like Adam Benoit, John Morell was never seen or heard from again. The farmhouse to this day, still in his name, fell into disrepair. When I visited the farmhouse in 2013, I had every intention of exploring the cellar. The building had long been abandoned, so I broke the lock and cautiously ventured inside. I found everything to be completely untouched. Dusty wine bottles still filled the shelves. Old, rusty tools were piled in a corner. At the back of the cellar, I found a candle covered in dust and burned almost to the end. All over the walls of the cellar, across the ceiling, across every inch of surface, was the word "alone." As I had expected, the word was written in two distinct styles, and I had come prepared. I compared the writing to that of Adam Benoit's journal, as well as John Morell's signature on the deed. I'm no expert, but the two styles appeared to me as identically matching the samples that I had brought with me. There's no way that this wasn't the writing of the two long-vanished men. In my curiosity, I lit the candle. Softly at first, then growing louder and louder, I heard the sobbing, the sounds of loss, of despair, the weeping of those abandoned to an eternity of nothingness. And in the shadows, the figure of a woman slowly drifted into view, dancing toward me. I quickly extinguished the flame and left the cellar. But of course, I brought the candle with me. The haunted candle of Clouderville has sat quietly in my collection for several years now. Only once since that day have I lit the flame. I was in my attic among my collection, and almost immediately I heard the quiet sobbing of poor souls lost in time. I snuffed out the flame. The next day, carved into a rafter in my attic, I discovered a single word. You guessed it. It said, alone. At the time of this story, I was a 16-year-old high school student. I got a babysitting job for a couple who had a family wedding and needed a babysitter for a super late night. I was referred to them by another family that I used to sit for. Keep in mind, this was when cell phones were just coming out, so I had a really crappy flip phone with a certain amount of minutes. There were 3 kids. The oldest was a boy about 8, the middle boy was about 6, and there was a little girl who was a toddler in diapers and couldn't speak. I came in while the sun was still up to meet the kids while the parents were still there. The parents were so cool. They showed me where all the snacks were and gave me the ground rules for the night. Kids in bed by 7:30, teeth brushed, you know the drill. Once they left, we started eating dinner. To my shock, the middle child, who we'll call Teddy, kept throwing his fork hard at his siblings and pinching his sister with his nails under the table. He kept kicking my shins and throwing his food around the room. The moment his parents left, he became a terror. Their house was old but remodeled, so their toys were in the basement playroom. After dinner, we all went in there to play. As soon as we went down the stairs, it felt wrong. Don't get it twisted. It was a beautiful finished basement with a couch, flat screen, and toys, but something just felt creepy about it. Then the little girl kept pointing at a blank wall, one with no pictures or anything on it, and kept screaming at the top of her lungs and crying. It really unnerved me. At this point, I'm getting a terrible, really bad feeling. So I say, let's go upstairs and watch TV till bedtime. The kids seem to love that idea. So I carry the little girl upstairs and turn on the TV for the 3 of them and then go back down to grab her favorite stuffed dog and clean up a bit. When I turn around to walk upstairs, I see Teddy smiling a sickening smile at the top of the stairs. He has his hands on the light switch. My stomach dropped. I didn't have my phone or a light. And if this little shit locks me down here, I thought. The light switch is at the top of the stairs outside the stairway, so if he closed the door, I was screwed. And sure enough, he flicked off the lights, cackled, and went to slam the door and lock me in the dark basement. I have never moved so fast in my existence. I flew up the stairs and shoved my hand into the door to keep him from locking me down there. I asked him why he did that and yelled at him to never do that again. All he did was smile at me and then slowly walk away, giggling. I iced my hand and watched him closely for the rest of the night. Bedtime comes around, and I put the kids to bed upstairs without any problems. There were 3 bedrooms, the parents' room at the end of the long hall, then the baby girl's room in the middle, and the boys shared a room with the bunk bed at the end of the hall by the top of the stairs. Everything finally seemed quiet, and I began to forget the horrors from earlier and started watching TV. About an hour after I put her down, the baby girl started screaming through the baby monitor. A scream that sounded like she was in pain. Thinking her brother Teddy was bothering her, I ran upstairs to stop him. As soon as I get to the top of the stairs, I see him laying down on his bed facing the wall. The baby is hysterical and is again pointing at nothing and crying. I am freaked out by now. I rock the baby back to sleep, check on the boys, then return to the living room. What the hell is happening? Am I imagining things? I shake it off and turn the TV back on. This is when the night goes from bad to a total nightmare. Once back in the living room, I start to hear screaming every couple minutes. What sounds this time like a grown man screaming in pain. At first I thought it was outside or maybe a TV or a radio, so I ignored it and kept watching television. But soon it became clear that it wasn't a joke, and it wasn't my imagination. It was coming from inside the house. Then I hear what sounds like little feet running upstairs in the hallway. For a second I'm not scared anymore. I'm angry that Teddy's out of bed 2+ hours after bedtime. I go to the bottom of the stairs and holler up Teddy's name and tell him to go back to sleep. I don't hear a response, but I do hear the footsteps continue. Then I hear what I think is him run into his parents' room at the other end of the hall. Feet pounding down the hallway, clear as day. So I sprint up there, thinking I've caught him in the act. The hall is empty and dark. I turn, and I find Teddy is sitting up in his bed. He's staring at me again with that sickening smile. I could see his brother was asleep on the top bunk, and I could see that his baby sister was asleep on the monitor in my hand. He gave me the creeps. I told him to lay back down. I go back downstairs to the middle floor. I then hear someone walking up from the basement, and I lost it. I slammed and locked the basement door, and I called my house number. My big brother answers, and I tell him that I'm scared. He puts me on speaker, and I explain everything to my family. I babysit every weekend, and I've never had a negative experience or called them like this, so luckily they believed me. My grandpa, being a super religious man, prayed with me and calmed me down. My big brother got into his car and came to sit with me until the parents got home, but the town I was in was a bit of a drive, so he told me he'd be there in 40 minutes. Even after we hung up, I could hear the footsteps running around the house. I am not a religious person, but I sat on the couch and prayed and cried. I have never been so scared in my life. I was terrified. The parents came home before my brother got there, and they saw that I had been crying. They asked what happened, and I told them everything non-supernatural that occurred because I didn't want them to think I was a crazy person or tell people not to hire me. I just wasn't going to mention it at all. So I just said Teddy was a handful, and that was it. As I was leaving, the dad, in a deadly serious voice, said, "Did the ghost bother you?" I slowly turned to him, not fully believing what I had just heard. I asked him if he was being serious. He said, Oh, I'm being serious. We've had a ghost problem for a while now. Did you experience anything yourself? I broke down and started crying when I gave them an honest recap of the night. I told them about the screams that I heard, the footsteps, everything. How the baby was crying at the wall and how Teddy tried locking me in the basement. They believed me right away. The parents said they'd moved into the house about 2 years ago after the old man who built the house died inside of it. He was an actual hoarder and fell and injured himself in the basement and died among his piles. Since no one could hear him scream, they didn't find him in time. By all accounts from the neighborhood, he was a mean recluse of a man. Either way, what a terrible way to go. They said they would wake up every night to things flying off of their kitchen counters and doors slamming. They would hear knocks and pounding in the walls. I was shocked. I asked why they stayed in the house if they knew it was haunted. They explained they weren't able to move due to their jobs and current financial situation. I have to admit that although it wasn't huge, it was a beautifully built home. That old construction kind of home with bookshelves built into the walls and a winding grand staircase. The dad said he would go downstairs every night for a year and say, "Go away. This is our home now. You aren't welcome here." Over and over. He said eventually the activity stopped. They said it only sparked up when someone new would stay in the house or when they'd have a sitter at night. They said since I quote-unquote knew the truth now, that they would pay me extra to come back because they could never keep a babysitter. Pfft. Yeah, right, I thought. I am never going back there. But I said I'd be in touch, and I ran out of that house. I am ashamed to say that I never answered their calls again. I felt bad, but there was no way in hell I'd ever return there. I still babysit once in a while, and I've never had any experience like that since. I still think of those kids sometimes, and I really think that Teddy was being affected by the spirit there. I've never encountered a child so cruel, so negative. Thinking of his creepy little smile still sends a chill down my back. I hope they were able to move or clear the negative energy. Either way, it's one night I won't forget. Lately I've been dreaming about pretty weird stuff. I can't remember everything, of course, but I'm going to try to explain it to the best of my ability. About 1 week ago, I started dreaming more often and I could remember them clearly when I woke up. But after about 2 days, some inconsistencies popped up. At the end of the dream, I would start hearing weird noises. This, of course, didn't bother me until 2 days ago when I woke up very early, about 6 in the morning, and the sound was still there. I jumped out of bed and turned on the lights and noticed that my window cover, a sliding cover since my roof is slanted, was pretty much wide open. My window is right under a streetlight, so I always close it because I need complete darkness to sleep. When I jumped up and turned on the lights in my room, the sound immediately stopped. It's hard to explain the noise, but it sounded like the flapping of a piece of clothing against the window. I'm pretty sure that it shouldn't have happened because that's my only window, and there is never any draft in my room. I decided to just go downstairs and forget about it since I was probably still just half asleep. This is where it got weird. I have a little decorative Captain America shield on the desk in my room, which is next to the door. This is important. I started dreaming normally, superpowers and stuff, until I somehow made it back to my home in my dream, and in my dream I sat down behind my desk with the door open. When I look out of the door from my desk, I see the closet doors from across the hall. In my dream, I remember that I started to fall asleep behind my desk, and I could see out of the corner of my eye that the closet door started to open. When I looked up and blinked, it was all normal again. This happened once more, but the third time I looked up, and the closet door kept opening. So I got scared and threw the Captain America shield at the closet door. In my dream, not in real life as far as I know. And then I jumped out of my bed scared. When I turned the lights on at, again, 6 in the morning, the shield was gone and lying on the floor next to me. I was very sure that that shield had been on my desk when I went to sleep. All the guards at my workplace know this theater is haunted. We're all used to the super eerie feelings down in the lower levels, backstage areas. Most of it can be passed off as long work hour stress, but there is definitely some evil shit in this building with us. It's probably an entity that's latched itself onto themes like theatrics and whatnot. I don't know. We got all kinds of stories. We have all heard the grand piano playing on its own in the night, heard ghostly voices arguing every now and then as we walk through the halls. Sometimes I smell a harsh burning in the halls at night, like sulfur. We all know that doesn't mean well. Tonight has been the worst it's ever been. I heard a door slam shut nearby as I was patrolling, and as a joke, I yelled out, "Who it be?" Inside joke with me and my friends to lighten my nerves. And I heard a deep, almost unintelligible male voice saying, "It be me." Sounds kind of funny, but I did not enjoy that. My Bluetooth headphones blatantly refused to work tonight. I also walked through one of the function halls in the darkness. Once the building closes, we patrol without many lights on, other than the occasional safety lights here and there. And I saw something following me in the mirror. I refused to look behind me, or stare at the mirror too long, but it appeared to be a figure clearly dressed in the costume of like a king, with a fur robe and a black jagged crown. Its head was tilting side to side as it shuffled along behind me, kind of like a wind-up toy. It moved so soundlessly that I was pretty startled by it. I couldn't feel my legs out of dread, so I didn't even stop walking. I just stopped looking immediately, and calmly kept the same pace on my way out of the room, pretending to see nothing. I think this is happening due to the current performance of a really old and famous play called Faust. A very famous actor died performing it here in Melbourne a long time ago in another theater nearby, and his ghost allegedly haunts the theater to this day. It's not far down the road from our theater. There is also a secret warehouse on the site, the location of which, for obvious reasons, we do not share with the public. But this warehouse is basically a storage room full of really old and valuable artifacts that have to do with early modern theater and music. Authentic historical pieces like 18th century instruments and old chests and trunks that belong to people of fame. One-of-a-kind tapes recorded by famous rock and blues musicians, old stage set models, some dating back all the way to the 1800s. It's crazy. I know for a fact that some of these old artifacts bring with them the presence of beings potentially even older than they are. You couldn't pay me to open some of these creepy-looking trunks. Safe to say, I'm glad I'm casual now and no longer work full-time. I've been working here for almost a year. It's hands down the most haunting place that I have ever experienced. I was 15 when the first time anything paranormal happened to me at this boarding school. For a month, I would have sleep paralysis. The next month, it got 10 times worse. As well as sleep paralysis, I would feel someone or something patting my head. I would open my eyes, and no one was there. This would carry on for a little while, until one night when I had sleep paralysis again and I looked over to the other side of the room. and saw a slightly washed out figure of a woman wearing a maid's costume. This happened for a couple more nights until I left that school. I came back to that school for sixth form, the last 2 years of high school if you're American. It all started up again when I was moved into that same dorm, but this time she followed me around the school. In the end, I prayed for her. However, she still follows me around when I wear a certain necklace to this day. The last story I have is about 18-year-old me messing around with a Ouija board. Please don't do this. So my boyfriend at the time was the one who bought the Ouija board. A good friend had just died a couple of months ago. We messed around with it for a little bit until the planchette started to levitate. I somehow went into a trance for what felt like about 30 seconds. However, I got told it was for 5 minutes. When I came out of this trance, I had 3 scratches down my arm. The hand with scratches was red hot to the touch, but the other was ice cold. Of course, we decided to do it again the next night. Something predicted the future. The first thing it said was fire alarm. The next thing was knee surgery. And the last was asylum. As soon as this happened, the fire alarm went off. A year later, I had knee surgery. And then 6 months later, my ex was admitted to a mental facility. I know this sounds far-fetched, but this is what happened. Again, please don't mess around with Ouija boards. Since I was 18 or so, I've been having dreams where I know it's a dream, but I cannot wake up. Once I dreamed that I was sleeping in my bed at my parents' house, and suddenly I woke up in the dream, and everything was normal. TV on, door slightly open, but there was a weird feeling in the room, which I ignored. I tried to get back to sleep, but my conscience told me to turn my head to the door, which I did. It was slightly open again, but this time it was opening a little more every second that passed, and a dark presence was on the other side of the room. At this point, I freaked out, jumped out of my bed, and tried to get out of the room, but something was holding me back, and the path from my bed to the door seemed eternal. Suddenly, everything stopped, and I woke up again in the same position I dreamed of first, TV on, door slightly open. I was still dreaming, and the same thing happened again. Door slowly opening, and me trying to run away from the room through a never-ending path from my bed to the door, with a weird feeling of someone watching me all along. This was a cycle that happened a number of times, that I can't remember, but it was more than 4. I knew I was dreaming, but could not wake up. I was really scared. I tried to wake me up by yelling or hitting me in the dream. Nothing worked. I remember that in real life I was not in my parents' house, and therefore I was not in that bed. At that moment, when I remembered that, I woke up. I dreamed something like that a couple of weeks ago where I couldn't wake up, even though I knew I was dreaming. I have no idea why this happens. Here is the chilling tale of one of my stepmoms, who we'll call Lisa here, experiences with ghosts that she has conjured through her old Ouija board. So Lisa had just divorced her ex-husband and was living alone in a new house with her 2 kids. She moved to get away from the torturous spirits or demons in her old house. She was settling down with a broken heart and a new life. She went to bed after forgetting to pray one night. She did this because it was what the priest told her to do to solve her problems with the paranormal. It seemed to work, she told me, but when I didn't do it, it would all come back. Lisa had no paranormal experiences while she was in that house. Until now. On the night she didn't pray. Her oldest kid was 7 and now sleeping alone. Her youngest was 3, and Lisa kept her sleeping in her room because she felt like she had to keep an eye on her. Because of all the experiences, she was a worrywart. Anyway, she falls asleep and wakes up to 3 knocks. She knows this all too well. She lit a sage, prayed, and went back to sleep. This didn't work. That night she kept hearing scratches on her wall above her head. She turns to look up and sees a face in the pitch black dark. Lisa just woke up and thought it was her imagination. But then came a feeling of impending doom. A feeling also that she knew too well. She turns on her lamp, turns around to see a black mist looming next to her bed. She grabs her daughter who is sleeping with her and grabs a Bible. She screams for the mist to go away and everything calms down. She flicks on the light, paces around the room, and looks over to where she heard the scratching sounds earlier. To her horror, she sees 3 scratch marks the size of tiger claws above her bed on the wall. The scratches were on her wall until she put up new wallpaper. I asked her stepdaughters. One of them remembers her mom screaming at a wall. She never saw what my stepmom saw, but they wondered why they saw the scratch marks. So before some of y'all say I'm making this up, it's not my responsibility to prove it. For some context, I live in an apartment with 3 other people while we go to college, but it's currently just me until January since the others went back home. I was singing a song that got stuck in my head when I heard whistling from the kitchen at the same time to the same tune. I thought one of the other roommates may have come back early, so I shouted out to them, but didn't get a response. I went to the kitchen, which is only just a few feet from the bathroom, and no one was there or anywhere else in the apartment. I checked the hallway outside, but didn't see anyone or hear a door open and shut in the few seconds that it took for me to get to the door. The whistling was very airy, as if it was someone who couldn't whistle very well. This isn't the first thing that happened to me in the last few weeks, but it's definitely the weirdest. It could just be my imagination, but it sounded like someone was directly outside the bathroom door, whistling toward it. The other thing that happened was far less weird, and could have just been me not paying attention, but I came back from work to find that the lights in my roommate's room were on, and the fan was blowing out at the door. Even though no one had been home, and the other roommates' families live quite a long ways from here. I asked where they were, and all of them sent back replies showing that they were nowhere near the apartment. I had a dream last night that I was being shown a series of gorillas in cages. In the dream, my brother told me that they had developed new technology to allow me to feel the touch of their hands through the cages. Sort of like the suits in Ready Player One. Weird dream logic. Anyway, I'm being dragged through the enclosure and one of the gorillas strokes my head, neck, and back. The thing is, I could actually feel this sensation in my body. I have never, ever felt anything palpably in a dream. My reaction to the sensation was a deep-set revulsion. The creepy thing is that it felt like there was a creature surveying my sleeping body, stroking it like a piece of meat to play with, while imbuing my dreams with an excuse as to why it was happening. Stranger still was that when I opened my eyes after the dream, I could feel this huge hand cupped over my mouth. I felt completely powerless to the creature. It was as though it had little, tangible intelligence, but I could feel its feral nature enjoying the moment. It felt like something had lain down behind me in bed. Every time I opened my eyes, I could feel its massive hand over my mouth. Chalk it up to the mind playing tricks, or whatever. It was creepy and intimidating. This is by far the spookiest experience my family and I have had regarding the paranormal. I'm currently living in Australia, and this all started when I moved into my current house around 3 years ago. In my culture, we believe that whenever a family moves into a new home, a priest should come to perform various prayers to bless the house. However, when my mom bought the house, we immediately went on holiday for 3 months, so we were unable to perform the rituals. Everything started when we first came back home. Just some background, my mom raised me on her own, so it was just the two of us staying in the house at the time. I was still in high school, and my mom worked in the city, so we both took the train every morning. She always left home earlier than me, so it was my job to lock up each day. She also worked late almost every day, so I would get home first and be home alone for at least 5 hours. One morning as I left home, I began to feel paranoid that I had not locked the door, so I walked back to check it. The door was locked. Later that day, when I came home, I walked up my driveway to find that the door was wide open. I freaked out, but was brave enough to go inside. Our kitchen is pretty close to the entrance, so I grabbed a knife and searched the entire house. There was no one there. I decided to not tell my mom because she was really stressed with work and I didn't want her to freak out too. Over the next few days, another strange thing started to happen. Our garage door would randomly open whenever we were home. My mom was kind of scared, but then we thought maybe our neighbor's garage remote functioned at the same frequency or something and it was activating our door too, so we dismissed it. It had been about 2 months since we were living in our new house and everything seemed to be normal again. Until one day when I was awoken in the middle of the night by my mom. She looked super scared and asked me if I had come into her room to wake her up. I said no, I was half asleep and had no idea what she was rambling on about. She didn't believe me and made me swear that I hadn't. I always play scare pranks on my family, so that was why. I swore I didn't and asked her what was up. She is a super light sleeper, and so while she was sleeping, she heard someone prop her door open. She looked up and saw the figure of a boy and thought it was me. She asked it, "What's wrong?" and blinked. There was nothing there, and her door was still open. She called my name a few times and there was no response, hence why she came to my room. I have to admit, given the stuff happening with the doors, I was kinda scared, but I convinced my mom that she was imagining things and she went back to sleep. Ever since that night, and up to this day, my mom still sleeps with her door open and the living room light on. And I do not blame her after what happened next. 2 weeks after this incident occurred, my mom's best friend and her son and daughter, who were both around my age, came over from our homeland, Malaysia, to visit us. I was really excited, as I have always been close to them. One thing you should know about my aunt. She's had many experiences growing up with the paranormal, and so she is super afraid of ghosts. For this reason, me and her kids always used to play pranks on her. One day the four of us were playing poker on the dining room table while my mom was taking a nap in the living room. Suddenly my mom rushes out of the living room, her eyes wide open, and she looked terrified. She asked who had woken her up from her nap. The four of us were dumbfounded, as we had just been playing cards the entire time. She then told us that she felt someone tap her shoulder while she was asleep. When she opened her eyes, there were 2 feet on the floor. Once again she blinked, and the feet were gone, and there was no one there. My mom was having a full-on breakdown, especially after what had happened the other night. Then my aunt, given how afraid she was of ghosts, started to melt down as well. I didn't want her holiday to be ruined, so I managed to convince them that my mom was probably in the middle of a dream, so when she woke up, she was most likely hallucinating. Yeah, I know, it sounds stupid, but hey, it worked. But then the next day, something else happened. My mom had gone to the shops to get groceries. The kids and I were playing video games in the living room, while their mom was having a shower. Suddenly we hear the bathroom door burst open, and out runs my aunt wrapped in her towel. She screamed at us, telling us to stop trying to scare her, and that it wasn't funny. The 3 of us were extremely confused, and her daughter asked her what had happened. She told us that she knew we were the ones knocking on the bathroom door, even after she told us to stop 3 times. I know it probably seems like she was overreacting, but again, I cannot emphasize her fear of ghosts. I exchanged a concerned look with her kids, and then told her that it genuinely was not us, and that we were playing FIFA the entire time. Soon my mom got home, and we told her what happened also. Let's just say that my aunt started sleeping with her room lights on for the rest of her trip. Soon she and her kids had gone home, and it was back to me and my mom again. We returned to our regular routine. My mom was finally at peace, and she hadn't seen anything for a while apart from the garage door opening on its own every now and then. The same, however, could not be said for me. It seemed that it had become my turn to be tormented. As I mentioned before, with my mom at work, I would be home alone for a few hours every day. I began to start to hear things. The strange bit is that it would never occur while I was in the living room. Whenever I went to use the toilet or went to sit in my room, I would start hearing things coming from the living room and kitchen. It started out small, just the sound of some panting, like if you had run a marathon, that kind of panting. But the minute I entered the living room, nothing. There would be no sound at all. It soon started to get worse. I would hear footsteps pacing around outside my room and spoons and pots falling in the kitchen. But every time I step out into the living room again, the noises would stop, and everything would be just as I left it. There was even a time when I thought I heard a kid laughing right outside the door when I was in the toilet. I decided not to tell my mom again because she seemed to be getting over her experiences and I didn't want to scare her all over. But one day I felt that I needed to tell her, and we decided that day that it was time we contacted our priest to perform the prayers for our house. It was the day my best friend and his parents came over for dinner. When it all began, it was a completely innocent meal. My best friend and his family are Malaysian too, and we were having a great time talking about home while having a signature Malaysian dish. My friend's dad was telling us a story when all of a sudden his face just froze, and his eyes widened. He honestly looked like he was having a stroke. His face contorted into a frown, and he just stared down at the table. My mom and I shared a worrying look, but my friend and his mom just continued eating like nothing was happening. Suddenly, his dad seemed to return to us, and he continued telling the story as if nothing had occurred. But he could see that my mom and I were visibly concerned. Suddenly, his wife tapped his shoulder and said, "Just tell them." He frowned at his wife and just kept eating. There was an awkward silence for a few minutes, and then he finally decided to address the elephant in the room. He apologized for scaring us and assured us that there was no need to worry. He then went on to tell us about his life. Since he was a child, he had been very religious, and from a young age he felt a very close connection to God. He regularly meditated and was very, very spiritual. So spiritual that when he was in his mid-20s, he had awoken with a gift. He was able to see dead people. I kid you not, when he said this, I immediately looked at my friend, waiting for him to start laughing at some prank. But my friend's face was completely serious, and he continued looking at his dad as the man told his story. He told us he could see them everywhere, when he was walking his dog on the street, when he's sitting in the park, in people's houses, and even sometimes sitting on people who had been possessed. He said the spirits were drawn to him because they knew that he could see them, and they would stalk him, begging him to help them reach the afterlife. He said there was simply nothing he could do because these people had died before their time, and they would simply have to wait on Earth until it was their time. Back home, he was regularly contacted by people having paranormal experiences to perform a cleansing or drive evil spirits away. He told us about some of those experiences, but I don't feel like it's my place to share them here. He then asked us something that gave me chills. "Have you guys performed prayers for your house yet?" My mom refused to answer the question until he told her why he had asked it. He said that he didn't want to worry us, but that if we hadn't, we probably should. My mom continued to ask him why until he finally conceded. This is what he said. "Remember when I had that moment just now while I was talking? I had a visit. I won't tell you what it was, but it was the same spirit that I saw standing at the front door when we came in here." That's when my mom told him everything that had been happening. It was during this time that I also decided to tell my mom about the things that I had been hearing in the house. My friend's dad then told us that he did not think it was a malicious spirit, but to be safe, and that it was time for us to conduct the prayers. Before he left, he asked my mom if he could see our altar in the prayer room. My mom took him to it, and we all followed. As he stood in front of the altar, his whole body shook, as if he just had a huge hiccup. He then put his hands together and bowed his head. Before leaving, he said, "I can see why the two of you have not been hurt. You're protected." That concluded our visit. A week later, we arranged for a priest from our local temple to cleanse and bless our home. I promise you that ever since that day, nothing strange has ever happened in our house. Even the garage door has stopped opening on its own. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I have learned my lesson. I will never move into a house without performing the rituals that my culture demands. I want to preface this by saying that I am incredibly skeptical when it comes to anything about the supernatural. I tend not to trust anything without scientific evidence. That being said, these experiences I cannot explain away. Beginning in 2014, early 2015, I worked in offshore Louisiana and lived in St. Bernard Parish where I'd rented a home. My younger sister and her 3 children were also living with me, as she and her husband were having marital problems and had separated. I was only home half the month because my job required me to be out for a week, then home for a week. Whenever I was home, my sister would tell me weird things were happening to her and her kids. She couldn't describe it, but had decided that it was paranormal, as many of us do when faced with something that we can't explain. She told me things were happening like locked doors flying open, then closing again. That if anyone was taking a shower, the lights in the bathroom would flicker on and off the entire time. I chalked it up to her having anxiety about being alone in the house. One night, as I lay in bed, however, I felt a weight pressing down on my legs. I assumed that it was my sister or one of my nephews. I raised up, half asleep, certain that I was about to see the face of a child staring back at me. Instead, all I saw was the concave indentation at the foot of my bed, indicating that something was on it. Whatever it was halfway on my legs and halfway on the mattress, as if it were straddling me. I was completely exhausted from the prior weekend, too tired to react more, moved my feet. As I pulled my legs up into a kind of fetal position, it did occur to me that moving them was difficult. It was almost as if a full-grown man were sitting on top of them. The room I was sleeping in, I had chosen because it had its own bathroom. Later that night, I got up to go in there and could have sworn that I heard a male voice saying, "Get out." It was immediately followed by a loud bang from the kitchen. Nervous, I tiptoed in the direction of the sound. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate, taking care not to wake my sister and her kids who were sleeping in a room close to the kitchen. She had also heard the noise, though, and had come out to see what it was. My garbage can, which was under the sink, had been thrown across the room where it landed beside the television in the living room. Seconds later, my oldest nephew came sprinting from their room, crying and screaming that someone was in there with him and had pushed him and his sister off of the bed. I ran to the room where my sister and kids were, hoping to see nothing. Before I could make it through the doorway, though, I was knocked off of my feet by an unseen punch to my chest. Suddenly, everything we had sitting on the island in the kitchen began flying in every which direction. I got to my feet, yelling at my sister to help me get the babies. With one of the boys in my arms, I ran to my room to grab my phone and car keys. As we entered, every single item that I had in the room was laying on the floor in a big pile. Books, bedding, even my television, which was attached to the wall. Needless to say, we got out of there fast. We completely moved out the very next day. While packing up our stuff, I called the homeowner and told him that we were leaving. When I gave him my reason, I expected him to laugh hysterically at me. He didn't. He wasn't surprised at all. I'm sure he's either been through it himself or had another renter prior to me who had the same encounters. I've never experienced anything like that before or since. My sister and I never spoke of it again. Anyway, that's my haunted story. Stay safe, everyone. When I was about 5 years old, I used to have these scary, recurring dreams that always had the same old woman in them. The old woman had gray, curly, short hair, and she was always wearing a creepy black dress with lace on the hems. In the dreams, she would always be trying to scare me. It seemed as though she took pleasure in scaring me. A prominent one that I remember is her sitting on top of me whilst I slept, with a basket of flowers. She would just stare right at me. So only about 3 or 4 years ago, when I was about 16 or 17, that same exact woman appeared in my dream. Same scary vibe and everything. What is super creepy about this occurrence is that I hadn't thought about this woman or talked about her for so many years. It was totally random for that to happen to me. Plus, this recent dream was just as vivid as the others. Almost as though she was visiting me again through her own free will. Another thing that might not have anything to do with the dream is that when I was a child I had a black dress just like hers that would hang in my closet, and I didn't know where it came from. It always creeped me out because it looked like the scary old woman's dress. I can't remember where I got it, but I might have worn it to my grandmother's funeral, who died when I was 2 or 3. It is not uncommon for me to have dreams about shadow people or to have sleep paralysis. On this particular night, I had a dream about a red marble, and that an entity was tied to this said marble. I felt that I had to protect this marble and keep it away from people who were trying to get it. The marble bounced out of my hand, and I told the entity to roll it back to me, which it did. Here is the weird part. I remember in my dream picking up the marble, but all of a sudden I was staring up at the ceiling. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see a shadow person approaching, and it started to lean over me, looking down. At this point, I have no idea if I'm awake or if I'm dreaming, but I remember saying over and over again, "Leave, leave, leave, leave." But the voice started to sound deeper and not like mine at all. My boyfriend sleeping next to me shook me awake, and I sat up, calmed down, and went back to sleep. In the morning, I asked what had happened, and he said that I was talking in my sleep and that I had said a sentence that was all jumbled, so he couldn't make out what I was actually saying. This made me feel weird, because if I did sleep talk, I would have thought it would have been one word, over and over. I remember in my dream feeling uneasy and scared. Does this sound like I was visited? Or was it just a really bad case of sleep paralysis? Edit. I also forgot to mention that I told my mom about the dream, and what time that it had happened, and she said that she had had a terrible dream and woke up screaming around that same time. We sleep on different floors, so I didn't hear her do this, but she doesn't remember her dream. Not entirely my story, but the main event happened to my mom when she lived at home with my grandparents. Back when she was a teen, they had a beagle that would often stare down the hallway and growl at nothing, the whole deal. In the middle of the night while lying in bed, my mom heard the dog begin to growl just before she felt someone grab her by the ankles and begin to yank her out of her bed. She says she was halfway pulled onto the carpet before she started saying the Lord's Prayer and the hands let go of her. But her dog was still going absolutely nuts. There have been other little things that have happened there too involving other people in my family. No one seems immensely worried about it, but I've always had the feeling of being watched in that house, even before knowing some of the stories I've heard now that I'm older. It's always the same one. My grandparents have lived in it since it was built when they were first married, so no bad history of the house itself, but perhaps the land that it's on? My grandma has told us stories about seeing shadow figures walking down the hall. My brother smelled my grandpa's cigar smoke in the kitchen during a family event. My grandpa had passed away a couple of years ago. Used to always smoke a certain brand of cigar outside on the back porch. And I once was startled by a loud, raspy cough right behind me while I sat in the empty house playing computer games with the speakers off. Recently, my mom and I had installed some cameras in the basement and on the front and back porches, just for extra security. I'm dreading the day my grandma tells us one of them caught something, and I'll have to see it with my own eyes. So I found this old, abandoned, broken down house in the woods close to where I live. I've only lived here about a year. I was alone walking around it, trying to see if I could have a peek inside. While I was walking around and whatnot, I felt a bit scared, but I pressed on. I found a way in, but it smelled so much of mold that I just decided not to bother. Anyway, the point of the story. When I was about to leave, I felt this sensation of sadness wash over me. I stopped and turned around and looked at an open window of the house from about 10 meters away, and I swear that there was a woman who stood there being in pain from the state of her house. I stared and was almost about to cry for a few moments as I walked away, but then I stopped and looked back again. I almost felt drawn to the house, not wanting to leave. But as soon as I got away from it and was walking back home through the forest, the feeling of sadness left. On a side note, the day before I had walked through a part of the forest where a lot of trees had been cut down and a lot of branches and bark were scattered all over the ground. There I also felt such sadness, as if the trees themselves were crying. As I'm writing this, I realize that I sound kind of insane, but I have never really felt this way before, and I feel normal like one day later, like today. Ever since we moved to our new house, I hear someone playing in my son's room when he's outside. Generally, I just wrote it off as something he placed precariously that just fell or something, and then I saw it. Or her, rather. I was sitting on my couch talking with the wife about whatever we were going on about, and when I turned my head back to look at my wife, I saw a little blonde girl in a white dress peeking around the corner of our hall entrance that leads to my son's upstairs room. I immediately asked my wife if she saw it, but of course she was looking at me when it happened. It was basically right behind her. Just the other day I heard what I thought was my wife calling out, "Hey!" as she was doing laundry. I got up to see what she wanted, and she had no idea what I was talking about, and said that she didn't say anything. And she didn't hear anything either, even though the sound came from the area where she was, at the bottom of the stairs that lead to my son's room. Are there any Android apps or something that can help me communicate with the spirit that I believe is in this house? She seems playful. And sometimes I hear my son playing alone, talking to someone that isn't there, but when I ask him, he says he's just talking to his toys. Okay, so this has happened 2 times that we noticed. The first time was 3 months ago. At 2 a.m. my husband was playing an Xbox game. Name of the game was Halo. So it was only my husband. My kids were asleep upstairs and I was down in the basement in our room in bed. I was reading. He told me that he was on the couch. The game was paused since he was looking in his phone for a cheat or something for it. By the stairs, he clearly heard, "Mommy." My daughter doesn't call me like this. But they were asleep. He even checked. This was yesterday. At 5 p.m., I was coloring in the living room. The TV was on a Parking Wars episode, and my kids were upstairs playing a game. The hubby was outside mowing the yard. I clearly heard, "Mommy? Mommy, Mommy!" Clearly a little girl, and it sounded like it was behind me, not where my kids would be. And it was not my daughter's voice. Now today, I was folding clothes and had small hand towels by me. I watched as they were pushed off of the couch and away from me. Not like they would if they had just fallen down.